Hello, 3 minutes after 10 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LB. Can I adjust my muff? Do you mind? It'll make a really bad noise, but it's just irritating. All right, I apologise for this. Right, ready? It's going to be crackly. There we go. Was it awful? How bad was that? I just feel more at peace now with the studio. This is a bit like Messi doing up his shoelaces before you've got to have it right. It's got to feel right in the zone. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. Okay. If this was the first day of industrial action by ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, how big a story would it be? What do you think? Okay, we can't know for sure. Well, we can actually. We could go back to the first day of industrial action by ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, and measure how much coverage it got. But would you agree with me at least, before we dig down ever deeper into this issue, would you agree with me at least that the coverage would be considerably bigger than it actually is? Here's the weirdest thing about my job, is that I don't know who's in charge of the news. I never have. There are instincts at play. There are trends and sort of movements. You get the... You know that, for example, the Mail and the Express are going to have more or less the same front page every day. And even when I worked there, I didn't understand why. I worked for the Express when it was going back a million years, and I wasn't there very long. But it was a left-wing newspaper at the time, would you believe? But in terms of like the show busy stuff, they knew. People on the news desk knew what the big stories were. Now, the Press Association puts a feed through to all the national newspapers, and sometimes the story demands high levels of attention. There are some days, of course, where every newspaper has a different front page. And for good or for ill, broadcasters still follow up to a point the lead set by the newspapers, because the first thing they do when they get to work at 4 o'clock in the morning is have a look at what the newspapers say, and increasingly the websites, and always the feed from PA. But who decides how big a story is? I mean, ultimately, who decides how big a story is? There's so many different cooks with a spoon in the broth. I don't know when or why something like industrial action by a train drivers union begins to attract less attention than it did last time. Because the story is exactly the same. The disruption is exactly the same. The grievance is exactly the same. I wonder if I can say again, exactly the same. And yet the coverage, the scale and the nature of the coverage, a few people pointing out Lionel Messi is not usually found doing up his shoelaces after the referee has blown the starting whistle on the match. That is a criticism that I will take on the chin. My muff management techniques clearly need a little bit of work. 'Twas ever thus. But the grievance is the same. The impact is the same. The disruption is the same. The action is the same. The coverage is not the same. So question number one is why? 0345 60 60973. And is it good or bad? Who does it benefit? The government or the unions? That the media is nowhere near as interested in this story compared to the levels of interest that it shows when the stories begin to break. Now, ASLEF is not Mick Lynch's union. We need to make that clear. But it's not that long ago that Mick Lynch became, I think, the most popular guest we have ever had on Full Disclosure. Is that right? Let me just check with Eleanor. He was, wasn't it? I think he's been overtaken now. He was there or thereabouts. Such was the level of interest in a railway union leader, in this case, the Rail and Maritime and Transport Workers Union, the Full Disclosure, which has had Hollywood stars on it. It's had, party leaders, former prime ministers, Carol Vorderman. It's had all manner of superstars and celebrities and famous and fascinating people on it. But the planets were aligned in such a way, was it about this time last year? A bit later in the year. But the planets were aligned in such a way that the planets of media or politics, trade unions, industrial action, the planets were aligned in such a way that he was the most interesting man in the country. And he was a particularly successful union leader in that he drew enormous amounts of attention and therefore support for his members and for his industrial action. And yet today, again, I know it's not an RMT action, it's Mick Whelan. He's been a guest on the show. He's taken your calls. He said train drivers are determined to get a resolution and remain in this for the long haul. But zero progress, according to him, has been made in negotiations with the rail delivery group. I mean, can I just sit here and say what's going on? Or would that sound really lazy? Or do I just sound bad at my job? I mean, you're sitting there going, "Oh, James, it's obvious, isn't it? Less disruption, less interest." But it's not obvious, because if the disruption is the story should be the same today as it was when the industrial action started, or whenever the industrial action happens. So let's look briefly at what we can all agree on. We can all agree on that the level of interest from the media is dissipating. We can probably almost all agree that as the level of interest from the media dissipates, so the level of public interest dilutes, right? I look, for good or for ill, we're not all Pavlov's dog, plural, but, if it's not front and centre, there you go. It's like the tree falling down in the forest. If there's no one there to see it, does it make a noise? If ASLEF go on strike and the media doesn't report it, does it make the same impact that it does when the media are all over it? You'd have camera crews at Victoria Station, wouldn't you? And at Manchester Piccadilly and at Crewe, just desperately, cynically trying to make the show sound a little bit less London-centric there by randomly inserting a couple of northern rail terminuses. But they'd be out. I mean, we've got someone out with a microphone, I'm sure, but nowhere near the level that we would normally have. And I'm just fascinated by that. Fascinated by the comparison and fascinated by what it means. So question number one would be, why? And be as obvious or as simplistic as you want, because it all matters. They all count. Why does the same action attract much less attention the more it occurs? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060973. Annie says, we were talking about this in the office yesterday. That's good to hear, Annie. I think the government just don't want to highlight that the country is still broken. Now, I don't normally need much encouragement to see client journalism now in this country is absolutely off the charts, off the scale. I don't know if you've encountered this, but you've got people queuing up to claim that there's something called a blob that is responsible for, Dominic Raab being found by an independent inquiry to be a bully. Somehow that's nothing to do with the fact that Dominic Raab is a bully, and all to do with an invisible, unnamed blob that is secretly exerting huge amounts of power. There's 2 pages of the Mail today. If you tear out one, then you're left with 2 pages facing each other. I tear them out so I can bring them into the studio. On one side, the blob is responsible for untold horrors, and on the other side, the woke mob is responsible for... How can you tell the difference between the blob and the woke mob, or the woke mob and the blob? And why, when they write these articles, after 13 years in power, 2 referendums, 5 general elections, 4 prime ministers, or is it 4 prime ministers and 5 general elections, desperately looking around for something to blame it on? The people who brought you Brexit, the people who brought you Boris Johnson, the people who brought you Liz Truss, the people who brought you Theresa May, the people who brought you Rishi Sunak, the people who brought you rivers full of shocking amounts of sewage, the people who brought you the cost of living crisis, people who brought you the energy cost crisis, the people who brought you the first country in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. Why is everything going so badly? Answer, it's the blob. It's the civil service, but it's nothing to do with Jacob Rees-Mogg being a complete prune who should never have been allowed anywhere near the reins of power. It's the blob. I don't know how much you have to be in hock to this government as a client journalist to be arguing that it's the blob and the woke mob that are responsible for all the problems that the country faces. But my goodness me, I hope the air is clean up there. I really do. So I don't normally need much encouragement to believe that government supporting media or client journalism or whatever you want to call it is deliberately helping the government out. But I don't quite see it here. I don't see it as clearly as perhaps you do, because they did it at the start. So why is it helpful to the government to not coverage industrial action now, but it was the same people back then when it was everywhere were covering it? Has it not worked? They covered it differently. They got it wrong. People didn't accept the invitation to start indiscriminately hating railway workers in the way that they accepted the invitation to start indiscriminately hating refugees or junior doctors or firefighters in previous episodes. Has it not worked, so they've gone away? Is it an admission of defeat? I doubt it. Is it a temporary truce You're supposed to hate train drivers. They've been telling you for years to hate train drivers. So why have they gone all quiet while the train drivers continue to take industrial action? Is it the fault of the woke blob, or the woke mob, or the blob? I don't know. It seems unlikely. But I guess if you're desperate for a pathetic narrative of bogus victimhood and all the other things you used to blame for the problems in this country have either disappeared or been silenced, then you're going to invent something like a blob or a woke mob. Avanti West Coast, Chiltern Railways, Cross Country, East Midlands, Great Western, Greater Anglia, Great Northern, Govia Thameslink, London North Eastern, Northern Train, South Eastern, Southern Gatwick, SWR Depot Drivers, SWR Island Line, TransPennine Express and West Midland trains are all on strike today. And, well, you wouldn't know it, really, from most media outlets, including the newspapers. So I want to know why. 0345 6060 973. And the question I can't quite articulate is a sort of inquiry into what it means, both in terms of the why of it and in terms of the consequences of it. If you are on strike, if you are an ASLEF member and you are on strike today, if you are usually working for one of these 15 train companies and you're downing tools between 7:30 and 6:30 today, what do you make of it all? If you watch these things closely, if you are somehow able to rise above the agenda set by the official media and you follow things with interest, what's going on here? And who is it good for? Who is the news angle good for? I think it's better for the government than it is for the train drivers. But if you're a passenger, and obviously you should be picking up the phones first today. If you're a passenger and your life is being disrupted quite severely again, how do you feel about the fact that the rest of us, apart from me at the moment, the rest of us are possibly looking the other way? I'll take anything. I just find this really, really interesting. I don't think there'll be any fisticuffs, will there? I mean, I don't bother ringing me to tell me that train drivers earn £1 million a year and they should all shut up and go back to work and yada yada bloke mob wob lobble dobble lobble dib. That's you're listening to the wrong radio show. I'm interested in intelligent contributions from thoughtful people, always. And I'm more interested in intelligent contributions from thoughtful people when we're looking at questions that I can't think of convenient or clear answers to. So why is it not being reported on anything like the scale that it was when it started? And what does it mean? What does it mean for the country? What does it mean for rail passengers? What does it mean for the unions? What does it say about the government? Who wins as a consequence of this? Because it looks to me now like a war of, I thought for a minute there I was going to bring my introduction in on time, but I've just had another thought. It looks to me like the government is just hoping that it will go away. All right, and now the right-wing media conspiracy does kick in. And by starving it of the oxygen of attention, everyone's talking about Blobs and Philip Schofield. By starving the industrial action of the oxygen of attention, the likelihood of it just going away increases. 0345 6060 973. And Gavin, I'm not going to put you in an idiot's corner, mate, but when about 30% of the press is dedicated to a story about daytime television, I'm afraid you can't argue that the strikes aren't getting enough coverage because there are bigger, more important stories around. But thanks for getting in touch. Right, over to you now. I've given you my thoughts and I've given you my confusion from both angles. What's going on and what does it mean? I could do that almost every day, couldn't I? I'll come on air, read out a story, and then I'll say, what's going on and what does it mean? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. There was an attempt, wasn't there, to give them a coating because they were possibly going to disrupt access to the Eurovision Song Contest. Do you remember? I think that was RMT rather than ASLEF. The latest action by ASLEF will affect the FA Cup final on the 3rd of June. They'll be on strike again. So that's part of the answer. Well, that's part of the question, actually, isn't it? In that why is attention paid to railway strikes diminishing so violently, so quickly? Because the reason why the unions are now targeting big events like the FA Cup final or the Eurovision Song Contest is clearly because they recognise they're not getting the attention that they normally get. And I don't know why. I really don't know why. And we'll start there. You can tell me. 21 minutes after 10 is the time. If you do call in, you will get through. I'm not chock-a-blocker yet, so don't hold back if you fail. Try again. Ian's in Leigh-on-Sea. Ian, what do you reckon?
Yeah, good morning, James. First time call, long time listener.
Welcome.
I thank you. I think very simply, I just think people have become bored of the situation with the strike. I think if this was happening pre-COVID, most people worked in an office, had to use public transport, and therefore was a bit more impactful. Post-COVID, we've learned to work from home.
Have you? Because when I get the train in, it's still full every day. I rarely get a seat.
I think Mondays and Fridays is pretty empty. If you're going up towards London,
not for me,
for example.
But no, it is noticeably quieter. But that, I mean, whether it's Mondays and Fridays or the whole week, it does slightly undermine the idea that the attention's not there because the disruption's not affecting people. Except that they can now do on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday what they would be doing on Monday and Friday anyway.
Exactly, and therefore, as a result, I think with more people, not everyone, of course, but with more people able to work from home, it's become a pain, but not enough of a pain for them to think I need to demonstrate about it. So I can work around, and therefore, I think as a result, it's gone. And I think the media have got other things to focus on, and I think it's
you might be. I mean, you must be partly right about but that, I mean, it depends which end of the telescope you're looking through, because the fury about railway strike, the fury about any industrial action is not normally confined to the people who are affected by it. You know, the Sun, when Rupert Murdoch bought the Sun, he did so with the express intention of breaking unions. And since 1981, the right-wing media has been dedicated to demonising them at every turn. This is an open goal. Normally, if they can turn the population against firefighters, they can give railway workers a right old kicking. So they would do that regardless of the scale of impact, and they're not doing it on this occasion.
That's true. I mean, maybe there's an easy piece, but I do think this is a little bit like the coal miner strike, where I think the government are in for the long haul now, and they're looking to break the union.
You've gone there. You've gone there. I mean, the difference there is that no one really appreciated on the miners' side of that dispute that Margaret Thatcher was quite prepared to preside over the obliteration of coal mining forever. For sure. I can't think that Rishi Sunak is prepared to contemplate the destruction of the railway network for generations to come.
I don't think it'll go that far, but I do think I see a tide turning towards unions again. I mean, there was a lull for a period of time where unions were, sort of doing what they were doing, but in a quieter way. Now, when you hear Nick Ferrara earlier talking about the civil servants potentially going on strike over Rwanda, I mean, it starts to make you think, well, where are the unions going? So anyway, that was my thought.
I like it. Thank you. I love that story about civil servants going on strike over Rwanda, because we spend a lot of our time wondering how terrible things have happened throughout history, and we often blame the foot soldiers. We often say, well, why didn't they just say no? Why didn't that person just turn around and refuse to obey orders? But, remarkable how quickly authoritarians will be. No, you have to obey orders, even if they're disgusting, amoral, unchristian. Even if they go against every fibre of your being, you must obey orders. I tell you, scratch a Tory, and you don't have to dig deep to find an authoritarian lurking underneath who claims to be dedicated to freedoms and liberties. 24 minutes after 10 is the time. Jack's in Brighton. Jack, what's going on?
Oh, hi, James. Yeah, first-time caller again, long-time listener.
Welcome. So, you don't have to say that. It's always nice when you do, but I don't want anyone to feel that it is a requirement on the programme.
Well, I thought it was, but no.
No, it's not.
To be honest, this is going to be quite boring, because I completely agree with your last caller. I think he must have been speaking at the same time as I was talking to your show host. I'm from Brighton.
But it doesn't work as an answer, because the scale of the coverage was much, much higher 6 months ago. Someone said, what's missing, James, is Richard Madeley getting owned by Mick Lynch every morning on the telly. So that we were all doing a bit of working from home back then, when Mick Lynch was sort of the most popular public figure in the country for a month. All of the things that you can say in support of the idea that of people's working practices have changed were still true. So the dial has been turned down deliberately, not by events, but by choice.
Well, of course, yeah, but I think that also comes from a point from apathy as well. If it continues over a continued course, then apathy sets in. people then get to a point where they go, well, actually, they're resigned in the fact that they're going to have to, even those companies that may have had the infrastructure, they would have changed it. I mean, Brighton, a hell of a lot of the culture that's here has changed even in the offices that are local that people live in. You've got sofa days, you've got a complete twist on how people and the sort of younger generation are working in general. So I think with that, it becomes... It does take the weight off of the union's ability to use it as a big sort of blunt tool.
Because I think you're right.
Yeah.
But
I think it does benefit the government in that sense.
Well, only up to a point, because the government are simultaneously desperate for everybody to stop working from home.
Of course, yeah.
So you've got a weird little contradiction there, is that, the Telegraph is doing their business today, talking about us being the most reluctant workforce in Europe to return to the office. We worked that out months ago. It's because so much money is made from having an interest in commercial property, commercial landlords, so people like Jacob Rees-Mogg dancing to their tune when he starts being rude about people who are working from home, loads of right-wing commentators being rude about people working from home, people working from home just quietly getting on with it. But that might be the reason. Go on.
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, there's a wider side of that as well. I mean, not just from the commercial landlord's perspective, but you have got the infrastructure that's set around offices, so they are suffering from it. I mean, I own a retail shop. I'm not in hospitality sector, but the hospitality sector is absolutely on its knees. So I agree with you that it doesn't benefit society in general. It doesn't benefit the government long term. But I think from a short term perspective, from a news perspective, directly on the train strikes, I think, unfortunately, the weight has been sort of taken, or the wind has been taken out of the sail, so as to speak, a little bit.
Yeah, the spotlight has swung away, and it may be because, actually, a few of you pointing out, Joe puts it best. You explained it at the top of the show, James, whether you realised it or not. I didn't, Joe, I must be honest. When they did cover the strikes a lot, it meant talking to Mick Lynch and Mick Whelan a lot, and it made them, like you said, it made Lynch, like you said, the most popular man in Britain. He tore the government and every interviewer apart. By reporting on the strikes, they lose support, because you don't get government criticism like that in the mainstream media anymore. The government and client journalists need the strikes to wither on the vine, as they can't win this battle head-to-head. That's from Joe in Doncaster. That's the closest so far to a flag-eyed salute. I mean, listen, I'm always wary of conspiracies, but there has to be a little bit more to it than fatigue, because the Mail and the Murdoch media don't care whether you're tired of it. Look at what they've done with trans. Never makes the phones ring, the trans conversation, on any show. But if you're desperate to foment some culture war, if you're desperate to give the Tories something to hide behind as they seek to evade responsibility for 13 years of Tory rule, and of course, if you've been cheerleading for them for 13 years, you're going to be desperate for the transgender story to attract a hell of a lot more attention than anybody in real life gives it. You'd be asking every politician you ever meet whether a woman can have a penis while hospitals aren't opening and people are being banned from giving evidence to civil service meetings because they once called Jacob Rees-Mogg a wazzock on Twitter. You've got a cost of living crisis, fuel crisis. You've got an opportunity to sit down with the leader of a major political party. You're going to ask them whether a woman has got a penis. It's insane. But you'd be doing that, I guess, if you'd been cheerleading for the Tories for 13 years. So when the unions come along, when this comes along, why isn't it getting more attention? Answer, because it's not pushing the old buttons. It's not as easy as it used to be. People don't hate the unions anymore. And therefore, we're just going to largely ignore industrial action. We haven't heard from passengers yet. I don't think we have. Where does it leave passengers, this? The idea that it's not headline news, it's not front page news anymore, that your ability to get to and from work every day is being severely and regularly compromised. It's coming up to 10:30. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. So here's a good example of something. This is from January. I wonder if you're aware of this. Hugh Merriman, who is he still the rail minister? It's so hard to keep track. It's so hard to keep up. But he was in January anyway. And he was, I think, in front of a select committee, and he was asked by the Labour MP, Ben Bradshaw, about the cost of the strike so far. In fact, Ben Bradshaw, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. If you sometimes think that I disappear up my own backside when I get obsessed about how poor the flow of information from politics to the population is, and why I talk about client journalists and can a woman have a penis merchants and all that, the stuff that matters doesn't reach the people. So how much do you think the railway strikes had cost by last January, by January of this year? They cost about £1 billion. Ben Bradshaw, the Labour MP, says to the rail minister, would that be enough money to have solved this dispute months ago? And the rail minister replies, yes. He says, if you look at it in that particular lens, then absolutely it's actually ended up costing more than would have been the case if it was just settled. So by continuing the strikes and refusing to negotiate, the government has already spent more money than it would have spent on settling the strikes, according to the actual rail minister. I'm not going mad, am I? That's a really important thing. That is a significant issue, shall we say. So what are they playing at? They've spent the strikes have cost more money than settling the strikes would have cost. Not according to the blob or the woke mob or any other mythical enemy that right-wing people conjure up in order to keep you frightened and ignorant. That's according to the rail minister in Rishi Sunak's government. That was in January. Over £1 billion it had already cost. The economy. And it would have cost less to settle the dispute with unions over pay and conditions months ago, according to a government minister. So what's going on? Still on strike, not getting a fraction of the coverage they used to get. Passengers almost entirely forgotten. I don't get it. Tom's in the Rhondda Valley. Tom, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Tom.
Hello. I've been a railman for 37 years.
Okay.
And a member of the RMT for the same amount of time. And when I was waiting to come on, I think you answered your own question at the beginning of the show, and just now, really.
Go on.
I think Mick Lynch in particular, he was such an effective communicator in front of the media that they don't want him on there.
Yes.
They don't want him on TV. I mean, he's not only did he communicate his case very well, he exposed a lack of gravitas, I think.
Yes, a lack of seriousness among interviewers. I mean, he was,
and also Tory MPs he was up against when he was on when he was appearing on there. And I think they decided they can win the battle, so they won't cover it as little as possible.
But then you just don't invite him on.
Well,
you just don't invite him on, and you start banging on about how all train drivers earn £90,000 a year and they wouldn't know, and they're all lazy. You know, it's really easy to do. Tom, trust me, it's really easy to do. Unfortunately, you're letting Mick Lynch into your studio and he's going to pull your pants down. So just don't let him into your studio.
Well,
and it's ASLEF action.
That's what they've done to some degree.
Well, that's true, but you know better than I do. This is ASLEF today, not the RMT.
Yeah, I know this is ASLEF, yeah.
This is getting no coverage at all either. How do you react to the news that it's already cost the economy more money in January? By January of this year, it had cost the economy more money than it would have done to settle in the first place.
Well, as Liz Truss would say, it was a disgrace. That's the way I look at it.
What's the RMT state of play at the moment? What's the situation
there? It's unchanged, really.
So
I'm in South Wales. We settled ages ago.
Yes, I know.
And in Scotland, and in Scotland, Merseyside, and on Newcastle, and in London. Anywhere where the Tories aren't under control. Things have been settled with a minimum of fuss, really.
I think you're right. In fact,
all for lower than inflation pay rises as well, which to me is the epitome of restraint.
Which makes it even more mysterious that the right-wing media aren't getting on top of things, aren't giving it the coverage that you'd expect them to give it, because it is so obviously party political. A couple of texts actually to back up Tom's point. Can you make it clear there are no rail strikes in Scotland today because the union and the Scottish government talked to each other and reached agreement? We probably need a bit of insight into why the situation in England is so different and so much worse. Tom, thank you. Christine's in Liverpool. Christine, what's going on?
Yeah, I totally support the train drivers through all of this. I think it's an absolutely exhaustive tactic through the government to just leave them alone and they will come home and just sit on their hands and do nothing. I think they were surprised at the public because they're totally supportive of the railway. And there's nothing at all about the environmentalists. They must have a lot to say about people's attitudes who've now, after years of getting people to use public transport, everyone's now back in the car. The roads are absolutely shocking.
They are, aren't they?
With cars. Nothing at all covered by that. So it's just, the silence speaks volumes, basically.
Well, hang on a minute. You can't say it speaks volumes. You've got to tell me what it says.
Well, it suits the government is what I'm saying.
Does it, though?
Well, yeah, I think so, because they're getting their way. There's people who are losing money. It's not the government. I don't think.
Well, it is. It's the economy, so it makes them look bad. It's not coming out of the Treasury as such. This full figure of over £1 billion. I don't know what it would be now. It was £1 billion in January, but it is. We've got high inflation and a high cost of living, and industrial action adds to the fiscal burden that a country faces. But I suppose no one's really pointing that out, and the average person marvelling at how much a loaf of bread costs now is not going to trace it back to the government's failure to reach a settlement with train drivers, are they?
No.
In any way.
No. And why aren't they fixing it?
Well, you tell me.
They should tell us. Shouldn't be me that tells them.
Well, I think they would say
why they aren't doing it.
I think they would say if we settle with the railway workers, then we'd have to settle with all the other public sector workers as well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I agree totally. If they topple the railways, then every other sector is easy meat. And I think the public knows that. And if they can get one of the strongest as-left unions, if they can topple them, they've done a great job on the rest of the country. So I'm so happy that everyone knows exactly what's going on, and they can see the government with the trousers down, literally getting the bottom smacked.
Well, you bring out the pedant in me, Christine. I have to point out it's not literally getting their bottom smacked. The members of this government pay huge amounts of money in special establishments in Soho for that particular privilege, but and neither is it everybody who knows what's going on. We can take a little bit of credit that anybody listening to this programme will be aware that the railway minister has conceded that the economy's already lost more money than it would have cost to settle with the railway workers, and that the apparent determination of the government to sort of grind it out is based upon a reluctance to give an inflation-linked pay rise to everybody else in the public sector, which literally means, to use that word, that the government's policy is to ensure that people working in the public sector get real terms pay cuts. Because if your wages aren't going up in line with inflation, or ideally a little bit above, then you are getting a pay cut every year, not a pay rise. Yeah. So that clarifies things a little, doesn't it? Let's go to Cormac, who's in Borough Green. Cormac, what would you like to say?
Well, it's sort of more or less the same as already been said, in the sense that if you limit the amount, or if you lessen the amount of coverage of these strikes, you seek to make heroes of them. In the likes of Mick Lynch, you don't want to have another Mick Lynch on their hands. So what you do is you basically you diminish the amount of coverage that you got simply to be able to do that. A Conservative government has always been.
But why did they
good.
stop, though? They did it for ages. I'm being a bit of a pain in the butt today. I apologise. But it's too simplistic to say that, because Mick was everywhere for ages. He did, he came on, he beat some people up, and they could have stopped booking him then. Madeley, in particular, was like some sort of masochist, exposing himself to Mick Lynch's sort of rhetoric on a regular. But everywhere you look, there was clips on Twitter of Mick Lynch bouncing someone around the studio, and they invited him back again and again and again. Why did they suddenly stop?
Well, to make sure that doesn't happen again. I mean, if you do have Mick Lynch going on and making a fool of Madeley, then he can't really be a decent mouthpiece anymore. People are going to want to hire him to say, a government-backed media, which is kind of what we do have to a certain degree.
Not on ITV. You've got it on the newspapers, but ITV's not. I mean, that's just down to individual. Same with LBC, actually. We're allowed to do whatever we want. So if Mick Lynch had beaten me up on a regular basis, I think the Catholic in me would be inviting him back on as a form of penance or confession, but I can imagine why other people might not do. And from the government's point of view, where does this go?
Oh, well, I think at the moment, it's, as I said before, a Conservative government always gets this bit wrong, because they always think that we are, to a certain extent it's right, where we are likely to believe the government more than we are to the union.
Yeah.
During the 80s, that's what happened. But we're at a stage now where there are so many people who are going on strike, from public sector right the way through, that they can't all be wrong.
No.
The fact is, the government are now being shown to actually be wrong on some. I know we've had them for the last couple of years being so wrong about so many things. This is just another one.
No, Cormac, that's all because of the blob, though. It's nothing to do with the people in charge. It's all because of the blob.
Yes.
The blob has scuppered them at every turn. It's nothing to do with the actual politicians or the prime ministers or the government or the cabinet ministers. Dominic Raab did not have to resign from the cabinet for bullying people. He had to resign because he was a victim of the blob, Cormac. You have to remember this. It's very important.
Is that true?
Yes, absolutely true. How dare you suggest that it isn't? And if it wasn't the blob, it was the woke mob. They're not responsible for any of the things that have gone wrong. They're not responsible for any of the problems that the country faces. It's all the fault of the blob. I digress slightly, but the idea that the government is, I don't know what it's doing, just sort of sitting tight and hoping it would go away, secure in the knowledge that simple facts like the one about the cost of the economy already exceeding the cost of settling won't reach the parts that they need to reach. Cormac said something really interesting there, which regular listeners to this programme will probably have picked up on, when it said they can't all be wrong. I said to you from the very start of my coverage of all industrial actions, and I got my backside handed to me on a plate by Bob Crow, the late Bob Crow of the RMT, on more than one occasion. Anyone who thinks all industrial action is bad is daft. I mean, anyone who thinks all industrial action is good is also daft. There came a point in the miners' strike, for example, where the existential threat to the industry got completely ignored by the leadership of the NUM. I'm oversimplifying horribly, but I need to make the point that they can't all be bad. And what Murdoch and the Mail have managed to engender now for decades is the idea that anybody going on strike is a wrong 'un. Anybody exercising their democratic right to withdraw their labour is sinister. You know, the Nazis came for the trades unionists pretty early on. They're quite high up on Pastor Niemöller's list. That's not a coincidence. An exercise of power by the people is anathema to authoritarian regimes, which is why the coverage of the civil servants considering strike action over being compelled to contribute to the disgusting and deeply immoral Rwanda policy is so interesting. That's a real mark of, I would suggest, far-right sympathies, actually. I don't reach for that phrase as often as I reach for the phrase right-wing. But if you're going to be attacking civil servants for exercising their democratic right to withdraw their labour over something that they consider to be immoral, then you are heading down a very, very, very dark corridor. But, of course, if you've got your eyes shut, you probably won't realise. It is 10 minutes to 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So just quickly, before 11 o'clock, I'll talk to Sarah in a moment, but I'll tell you what, I'd like some snap answers to this question. And you can you're more than welcome to parrot what you think the government have said, because I'm not entirely clear myself, or you can just tell me what you think from your gut or your brain. But why won't the government negotiate with the railway workers? So Mick Whelan of ASLEF is pretty adamant that they are further away than ever from any sort of a deal. Weekend strikes, he insists, are not planned to coincide with major events on the vaguely reasonable grounds that there's not a day in the calendar when there's not a pop concert or something going on. I think the Derby and the FA Cup final are a little bit exceptional personally. Beyonce's tour in London probably less so. And the England-Ireland cricket Test match at Lord's considerably less so. But why won't the government negotiate? What do you think? And quite a lot of callers coming on, and I don't like it when this happens, actually. I'm conscious of sounding ungrateful to callers. I tell them off for saying long-time listener, first-time caller. I don't like it when they say I agree with you or I agree with the last caller. So come on and position yourself from a very different political perspective and tell me why you think the government won't negotiate with railway workers whose union really want pay that allows them to keep pace with inflation. In the case of the junior doctors, it's a little bit more complicated, but a pay deal that sees them properly rewarded for their hard work. Why won't the government negotiate with the unions, given that we know by their own admission it's costing the economy more to endure the strikes than it is to settle the disputes? And that ties into the conversation we've been having since 10 o'clock, because if the media, if the right-wing newspapers were going nuts about this, if they were setting off fireworks everywhere, if you had all your front pages about Red Mick and Red Mike and Red Robbo and all the 1970s tribute acts, then you'd understand why. You know, Thatcher picked a fight with the unions for political reasons as much as fiscal reasons, and the media got foursquare behind her, not least because Rupert Murdoch wanted to break the print union's stranglehold on Fleet Street. Why are they doing it? Because they're not doing it as a media spectacle. They're not doing it as this isn't winning or losing votes. It's just bizarre. Why won't they settle? Do they not care? Have they forgotten? Are they too busy getting WhatsApps deleted or throwing phones overboard? Why? Why will the government not negotiate with the railway unions? 0345 6060 973. I'll take as short or as long an answer to that question as you've got. Sarah is in Tunbridge Wells. Sarah, what's going on?
Hi. It's a short answer. Because I think that the media silence isn't necessarily...
It's not silence, let's be clear. Sorry, I'm being pedantic again. But it's nowhere near as loud as it would usually be or as it was in the early days of the industrial action.
Agreed. But I don't think it's anything sinister. I think it's a reflection of us. I mean, I'm at the bleeding edge of using trains.
Right.
And now I've just adapted.
Right.
It's a strike. Right. Okay. So we'll shuffle around that meeting. We'll find an alternative. I'm meeting friends for lunch on the weekend. We do a quick check. Is there a strike? No, there's no strike. Yes, there is a strike. All right, then. Let's make it. Should we make it next weekend? There's no fanfare. It's a resigned acceptance of, okay, our plans can go ahead, but obviously always in the back of my minds, given what's happened.
So you add that to the ease with which many, but not all people can work from home.
Exactly. We're now all set up, and there's no big, there's no big hoo-ha. You just email them. Oh, train strike. Should we make that meeting on Tuesday then? Next Tuesday?
So what you're saying is that the industrial action isn't having anything like the impact it would have had historically. The media responded to the early strikes as if it was the olden days, the pre-pandemic days, but the passage of time has taught us all that these are not as disruptive or as important as they used to be.
Exactly. And James, it comes on the back of COVID, where we all got so used to cancelling plans and everything falling through and things like this. So now, having arranging a lunch and, it's scuppered by a train strike, we've had a few years of plans being cancelled and in disarray. So we just sort of shrug our shoulders. All right, let's move on. Next plan.
I think that's going to be a very big part of it, actually.
Well, it is, and I think what I worry is
that's even weirder.
that they're going to shoot themselves in the foot. We're going to get so used to not having trains on our sides that we're going to in the end be, well, do you know what?
But then you've got so then the only thing that will save the railways are the people in the right-wing media banging on about why we've all got to stop working from home and get back to the office as soon as possible.
Well, it might end up like that.
Well, this is a mad congregation of circumstances, isn't it? Because this is the absence, the complete opposite of footballification. So I'm an idiot who believes Jacob Rees-Mogg about working from home, but I'm also an idiot who thinks that the unions are all awful. What on earth do I do in this situation? Because I'm having my big ears pulled in two completely different directions. I don't know. Well, no, you could well be onto something. Thank you, Sarah. So it just doesn't work. The newspapers can't stoke up the anger and the hatred of the public, because the public, whether it's because they are sympathetic to the union's cause, which is my preferred conclusion, but I think Sarah's is more persuasive, it's actually because the public now takes it in its stride in a way it never would have done before. So although the Tory press has tried to light blue touch paper, it's just damp. Nick puts it brilliantly. He says, this woman is right, talking about Sarah. We have plan Bs now for everything. Not if you work in a shop. Not if you work in a factory. Not if you need to be at work and you rely on the railways to do it. But then we go back to the earlier caller who talked about how the roads seem to be busier than ever. So on strike days, that is absolutely and indubitably true. I think we've actually made some pretty good progress today on the questions that we asked. Not necessarily the answers I was looking for. The industrial action is not working in the way that it would have done historically. Therefore, the media is not stoking in the way that it would have done historically. Therefore, the government is not negotiating in the way that it perhaps would have done historically. We're looking at a peter out scenario rather than a blow up. Mandy's in Dartford. Mandy, what would you like to say?
Hi. I wonder if the government are playing a waiting game. They're committed to lowering inflation, which we believe is going to happen anyway.
Yes.
They're waiting for a lower inflation figure, and then when it's low enough, they'll match that inflation figure and say, well, you've been asking for an inflation matching increase, and now that's what we're doing.
And they can do that for all the reasons that we've just run through with regard to impact and accommodation. The public not being as badly affected by it as they would have been historically, and the media not stoking it up as much as they would have done historically. It just increases the likelihood of what you call a waiting game. And they turn around 6 months, a year hence, and say, yeah, you're right. Here you go. Inflation's come down. You can have your inflation-linked pay rise, which is a lot smaller than what you were asking for a year ago.
The other thing is, in general economics, is if you bake into forward wages a high increase, that's there forever. And so as an employer, you obviously want to save future committed expenditure. So meeting a higher inflation rate then is baked in.
Could be that. And of course, the fact that it's damaging the economy or that the passengers whose lives are being very badly disrupted is not big enough, quotes news and news, to change the tactic. There's only one flaw in your theory, Mandy.
No,
there is.
Surely not.
There is one. Just one I can see. And that is that you are crediting the government with quite a clever plan. Have you forgotten who's in it?
Damn.
No, it doesn't. I mean, look, even a stop clock is right twice a day. But it's the only answer so far that I think fits all of the queries and quibbles that we've been examining with some success, I would argue, since 10 o'clock this morning. And that is indeed the last word. So we'll have to wait and see, won't they? I mean, inflation is not doing what Rishi Sunak thought it would do when he made his little laminated card with his 5 pledges on it, stopping the boots and bringing down inflation and cutting the debt. What were the others? Waiting lists or something? And I don't think the 40 hospitals are on there anymore. That ship has categorically sailed. But when inflation comes down, as it must, as much through the laws of gravity as the law of economics, then perhaps the negotiations will begin in earnest and a settlement will be reached. We will have to wait and see. My commiserations to people getting in touch to say they are massively disrupted by the industrial action, because you feel particularly ignored today. It is 3 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I hadn't been in this job very long in 2015. Actually, I suppose I had been in the job for quite a while when we marked the 10th anniversary of the July the 7th bombings. Sorry, I mean, I hadn't been in this job for very long when the 2005 July the 7th terror bombings took place. I just had a bit of a glitch then. That's what happens when you're trying to do two things at once. So I don't have it as prominent in my mind as I would do if I'd been doing the job for a lot longer. I that's for two reasons, in case you wonder what on earth I'm gibbering on about. The two reasons are, we weren't a very big deal media-wise on LBC at the time. We were a London-based station, and although the terror attacks happened in London, we were a tiny fraction of what we are now. And I didn't have anything like the sense of security in the studio that I have now. So I don't remember. And also the absolutely unprecedented nature of the story was such that I think I did it all on autopilot. I'd had some terrible personal news that morning, actually. I don't know if I'd ever told you that. And I knew I was going to have to try to get to Birmingham after the show during what was an actual shutdown in London. At one point, I was going to be getting in the back of a courier's van and smuggled to Birmingham. I'll tell you all the details when I write my autobiography 100 years from now. I mention that because I'm sometimes asked, if I do an event or something like that, I'm sometimes asked about the most important things we've ever done on the radio. And I always remember July the 7th, 2005, because someone sent me a text saying they'd just been stopped coming into London. I think they possibly were on the M25 or coming in on the M40. And the gantry above the road said, "London is closed, turn on your radio." And I can't imagine, if I do this job for another 100 years, please God, there will never be another moment like that. London is closed, turn on your radio. And I am here sitting in a radio studio. So why on earth am I mentioning that? I'm mentioning that because I'm going to read you a paragraph now from the front page of the Times that is actually apocalyptic, that is actually unbelievably apocalyptic, and yet it has got approximately 0.01% of the impact of that gantry in London. I mean, not least because that terror attack left 52 people dead, of course, and what I'm about to read to you now hasn't killed anybody yet. But I'm just giving you a quick heads up that if I live to be 1,000, this might be the moment I look back on and describe as the most important thing I ever did on the radio. Right? Are you ready for this? You might want to sit down. Front page of the Times. Very good science editor called Tom Whipple, reporting on a story you may already be aware of, or you may, such is the nature of man and woman, you may have glossed over it or not properly registered. And listen to the end. It's the last 3 words of this paragraph that I want you to really focus on. I want you to draw your attention to. More than 350 of the world's most distinguished experts in artificial intelligence, including the creator of ChatGPT, have warned of the possibility that the technology could lead to the extinction of humanity. Whoa. It's a joint statement backed by the chief executives of the leading AI companies, and they say that mitigating this risk, and I quote, should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. Now, whoa. I don't know what's just popped into your mind. It's possibly Leonardo DiCaprio, I think. It might be Leonardo DiCaprio, because that, if you've watched that film, Don't Look Up, that was doing The Business last Christmas, that kind of sense that someone is standing there saying, in this case, 350 of the world's most distinguished experts in the relevant field are standing there saying, whoa, and then the massed ranks of, I don't know, media and the political establishment all say, no, don't worry about it, nothing to see here. That's not quite what's happened, but the nature of the warning is such. Because, of course, what Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Don't Look Up was warning about was the extinction of humanity, potentially. I won't say any more than that in case you haven't watched it yet. I got a spoiler on Twitter today. I haven't watched the final episode of Succession yet, and some spoon put a flipping spoiler on. I'm not saying anything. I would never do that to you. I once gave away the ending of Macbeth. I can't believe the level of anger that generated. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. So I can't carry on being the slightly out of touch old geezer on the AI stuff. I said this to you last time we talked about it. Sometimes with technology, I quite like playing the role of the out of touch old duffer. Well, I'm not even playing a role. I've got to be honest with you. I'm looking at some of the technological developments, and I'm thinking I can't keep up with everything. I got heavily stuck into Twitter, but I've never really gone near Instagram, for example. What's that all about, I might say? What's that Insta business all about? And with AI, it's a little bit, well, video didn't kill the radio star. Do we really need to be But when 350 of the world's leading experts in the relevant field warn that a new technology could lead to the extinction of humanity, I think we've got to pay attention. Director of the US Center for AI Safety said the statement was a way of, he described it as coming out for many researchers. He said people were much too afraid to speak up earlier, and this intervention establishes the threat of human extinction. I mean, I'm not going to be able to say that without smiling. It's a self-protection mechanism, the extinction of humanity. You have to sort of respond to it with a wry smile. Otherwise, you'd live your life in a state of bleak despair. But the threat of the extinction of humanity this intervention establishes it as an intellectually credible concern. And if you are a grand fromage in this field, you have signed this letter, you have signed this warning. Other academics have dismissed it as unhelpful. I mean, I think you need to mention that. The narrative of superintelligent AI is a familiar plotline from countless Hollywood blockbuster movies, and that familiarity makes it compelling, but it is nonetheless false, said Dr. Mari Aitken, who's the Ethics Research Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute. So not necessarily as clued up as the actual people building it and responsible for it. In fact, there is an Institute for Ethics in AI at Oxford University, and Dr. Carissa Velith there says, I worry that the emphasis on existential threat is distracting away from more pressing issues, like the erosion or demise of democracy that CEOs of certain companies do not want to face. AI can create huge destruction short of existential risk. So there is, to put it briefly, a hell of a lot going on here. On a much less serious note than the extinction of humanity, because I think we could probably all agree there is no more serious note than the extinction of humanity. There would be no show the day after the extinction of humanity, Keith. I don't know if you've... No, there wouldn't. We couldn't come on air the day after the extinction of humanity. Could you imagine the size of the I told you so tin? If we did actually start warning about the imminent extinction of humanity, and like Leonardo DiCaprio in the film Don't Look Up, we were ignored or silenced. Whew. So on a much less serious note, I have been wondering for about 6 weeks how often we should do the story of has it arrived in your life yet? Because I think we've done it twice. Is anyone paying more attention than me? I think we've done it twice. The first time was a bit of a mess, wasn't it? It was a bit of a hot mess. Because I was playing that fuddy-duddy role. AI, what's that all about? AI, E-I-E-I-O. It didn't really help. It didn't shed much light. The second one was fascinating, because the second time we did it was when people started ringing in numbers and just saying things like, well, actually, I've just... So, and this is evidence of how quickly the technology is improving. I'm afraid... I don't understand a lot in this field, but I do understand that. There's no embarrassment in the fact that the gap between the two phone-ins that we've done saw a complete change in how the subject worked on the radio, because the technology had not only become a lot more popular, a lot more people were looking at it, but the technology is advancing at a rate, as I understand it, that nobody fully foresaw. So how big a gap do we put between the shows when we're working out and asking whether or not AI has arrived in your life yet? I think it could be almost weekly. At the moment, I think it could be 11 o'clock every Wednesday, almost. Has AI arrived in your life yet? But I'm leaning towards monthly at the moment. But I'm going to keep my powder dry with regard to making it fortnightly or weekly. That's how it's happening. That's why the two phone-ins we've done were so different. The first one was a bit, ooh, what's all this about then, Doris? And the second one was like, I'm now firing people, James, because I can get AI to do their job. That's the other side of the story. I mean, the threat to human extinction is obviously a bigger deal than the threat to your job. But I want to try, if I can, to ride both horses today. I want to have a little look at both of them. So there will be a lot of people. The thing about having 1.46 million listeners is that some of them will know a hell of a lot about this subject. It's a wonderfully liberating experience to have built an audience this size. It hasn't happened overnight and it hasn't been easy, but what I do know now is that there will be people listening to this who are experts, and unlike Michael Gove, I have never had enough of experts. I will never have had enough of experts. I blooming love them. Not only do I like feeling intellectually intimidated occasionally, but I love learning things. I can't imagine going through life thinking that you already know everything. It must be so limiting, and you must put so much effort. I suppose that's why you have to invent things like blobs and woke mobs to fight off confusion at reality or the unpredictable nature of life, or indeed the failure of your political convictions. So there will be people listening to this who really know what they're talking about, and they won't all agree with each other. That's the other thing that makes these conversations a little bit extraordinary, because, you know, normally you move towards a synthesis to bring in a bit of Hegelian analysis. You've got your thesis, you've got your antithesis, you mix it all together, and what do you get? Synthesis! There may not be a synthesis here. You look at the front page of the Times, you've got one AI expert saying this could be the end of humanity as we know it, and another one saying, oh, calm yourself down, honestly. So I'd like to start, if I may, with the possible extinction of humanity. And I have read the story, but I want to hear it in your words. Why would that happen? What should we be worried about? How would a super intelligent AI supplant or unwittingly destroy humanity? Okay, that's question number one. 0345 6060 973. That's the question. Okay, first question. You need to know more about it than I do, or to have read in detail the warnings issued in the last 24 hours. How would or could super intelligent AI, artificial intelligence, supplant or unwittingly destroy humanity itself? That's what I want to know. And talking through it might be helpful. Number you need is 0345 6060973. And we'll see how we get on with that first, shall we? Before we ask, has it arrived? Is it arriving in your life yet? So there's two very distinct strands of inquiry here. And I'd like to focus first on the first one, if I may, with your permission. How exactly would a super intelligent AI destroy humanity? How likely is it? How much credence do you give to these claims, given that they're coming from 350 of the world's most distinguished experts? And the question I'm hesitant to ask, for obvious reasons, is perhaps the most important. How soon might it happen? 0345 6060973. Because I've got a book out in November. I mean, the other story, of course, was the man described as the godfather of artificial intelligence quitting Google. This was from the beginning of this month. So I told you things were moving quickly. He was 75, so he might have been tempted to knock it on the head anyway. But he's warned that the dangers of the technology were quite scary, and he regrets some of his contributions to the field. I think that might have been the last time we talked about it. Was that the last time we talked about it? Anyway, how does it potentially threaten humanity? How plausible is that threat? And if it is plausible, when is it likely to happen? I'm going to do this joke once more because I've got a book out in November. And then I'll stop. 20 minutes. I won't stop plugging the book. God forbid. No, that'd be like the Ravens leaving the Tower of London. But I will stop doing that joke in this context. Amanda is in Islington. Amanda, what would you like to say?
Hi. So I actually work in tech. I'm usually based in San Francisco, and I have a little bit of background of working with AI, though I wouldn't call myself an expert.
Okay.
So what
I bet you would if you were a man.
I don't know about that. But what I see is most of the time when we talk about mass extinction events or like the problem with AI,
yes,
people have this image in their head of like this evil robot army, like in Terminator, coming up and just wiping out humanity.
Yes.
And from my point of view, AI is more of a tool. And the problem with it, or like the potential downside, would be it can cause mass unemployment, and it can put in the wrong hands, cause huge like economic disruption.
Right.
And I think when a lot of people talk about potential extinction events of humanity, they're viewing it more in this way. It can, historically we have this kind of concept of creative destruction. We have, say, cars are invented and everybody working in the industry where, building horses and carriages,
yes,
they become unemployed. But we have the replacement of, car manufacturing, roads, the entire travel industry replaces those jobs, and those people are okay and they continue on. But with AI, we're seeing potential large-scale economic displacement of people. Most white-collar jobs that I never really imagined in the past could be threatened by AI are now threatened.
Yes.
And we're going to see a future of, governments are going to need to address this and figure out a way on how are we going to support these people? How are we going to move forward as
So it's not that you have a sinister robot taking over the world. It's more that the technology creates a scenario in which humanity eats itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So the pressure then will be upon governments to limit the spread of technology, which is counterintuitive to everything we've thought about since, I don't know, the first caveman sharpened a flint.
Yeah, there's going to have to be some sort I know universal basic income is something that's been talked about in the past. I don't know how viable that is or realistic that is, but that's an option. But people are just going to have to be very creative on how they handle these sort of situations. My job myself is potentially could be replaced by AI very soon in the future. And it makes me and other people working in tech quite worried. But on the other hand, it's are we getting in the way of progress by saying that, no, you cannot replace certain industries and people with AI, and there has to be some middle ground where we prevent
this is compelling. I mean, I think that the warnings, the concerns expressed by these experts include all of the scenarios you've touched upon. They do include bioweapons being developed that humans would then use to essentially destroy humanity, or AI itself engineering a collapse of civilization because they've been programmed to sort of endlessly evolve without any guarantee that evolution would involve nice characteristics or selecting nice characteristics. I mean, the two other questions I was going to ask you sound a bit silly now, but I'll ask you anyway. So how plausible is the threat?
For mass extinction, I don't feel qualified to answer. I don't think it's entirely plausible.
No, I'm not sure I do at the moment, but it's only 23 past 11, Amanda.
Yeah.
And I've got more in my mind a dystopia than a mass extinction. Is that right?
Yeah.
So
I think it will cause some major changes. I
like
think
a Hunger
very
Games
different
type
in 50
scenario, or a tiny number of people living amazing lives while everybody else is relegated to the role of almost farm animal or crop. And secondly, what's the time scale? How quickly is the technology developing, and how quickly could it develop to a point where these threats become more credible?
I'm unsure, but I do know that it's increasing exponentially. When I was in college, we were working with natural language processing, large-scale models, and they're nowhere near as good as they are now. Google just released an internal document. Well, they didn't, at least an internal document that basically said, hey, now at this point, somebody in their garage on their laptop could produce a model similar to ChatGPT.
Really?
That is comparable. It's really not that hard. All the information's on the internet. You could do it yourself, and it's comparable in the quality. So I just think it's going to exponentially increase.
Well, that's the word I'm looking for, exponentially. It's going to get faster and faster and faster.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Why are you in Islington? Why are you over from San Francisco, if that's not nosy of me?
I'm dating a boy in this.
Oh, fantastic. How romantic. Oh, great. Well, Islington's not a very realistic window on the rest of the United Kingdom, Amanda, as I'm sure you know. It's lovely. I think that we did have a caller who was building his own ChatGPT. We'll catch up with him, I imagine, this hour. But let's go to Matt in Manchester first. Matt, what's going on?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I think I just wanted to sort of compliment what Amanda said, really. I'm not an expert as far as she sounds, but I come at it from a slightly different angle. So we live in a society now, or a media environment, where we are very easily manipulated by people using information about us to manipulate our views, to appeal to our personal preferences with advertising data, etc. Once that information can be automated and can be put to task, we will be at the mercy of these systems who have the ability to influence on such a significant level
I hadn't thought
that we have absolutely no control over it.
So you take the Brexit Facebook adverts to the point where they've got you actually attacking your neighbours.
It's exactly that. Yeah, right. It's something I'm a bit of a privacy nut.
Okay.
In a sense of things like Cambridge Analytica sort of really boil my blood. The manipulation of the information that these organisations sort of collect on us without really our consent, even though we sign up to the terms and conditions. And to my view, this seems like very much the next step. So organisations with good or nefarious intentions can take that information and bend it to their own aims using automated systems.
What would you be scared of? Because I don't want to sound glib, because obviously Brexit's been an absolute disaster, and similarly putting in governments that don't mean to do the population any good at all is bad. But apart from harvesting votes and money by selling you stuff you don't want or persuading you to vote against your own interests, what is the worst that you think could happen in these kind of contexts?
Well, to my view, that it would be a continuation of that. Yeah. So we have seen a deterioration of what people believe to be true, like this post-truth world that politicians seem to love to talk about.
Yes.
Take that to its next level, and then you're watching videos of, say, yourself on the internet saying things you never said, espousing views you never said. We become disoriented in a world where nothing is true, and therefore everything is possible. And the structures of government and organisation that we have put in place as a civilization to essentially manage the world and how we interact with it, they cease to function because no one is pointing in the same direction, because no one knows what to believe. It's quite hyperbolic, but
it's not, mate. You've got the phrase "extinction of humanity" on the front page of the Times today. I don't think hyperbolic come into it anywhere on a morning, like a rare morning like this. So, next two questions: how quickly is it likely to reach the point of which you are frightened, or about which you are concerned?
I mean, I defer to people who are far more well-informed, like Amanda. But
she used the word exponentially, which is a broad church, but we get the general sense of the speed of traffic and how plausible is it? I think in your case, very plausible.
But I see it all around me now. I mean, information being used to manipulate people on a daily basis. I mean, you're a great commentator on it, but
but I'm also a victim. I'm also a victim of it.
As we all are.
I don't put enough of my data out there to be politically exposed, but my algorithms are always throwing up. I trivialize it quite irresponsibly, probably, but I'm always discovering things on my Facebook feed that maybe, that looks interesting. I'll watch that, or I'll buy that, or I'll do that, and it's not a coincidence, is it? They're sending me stuff that they know that the algorithm knows will appeal to me.
And it speaks to that example that almost everyone has at this point, where I think my phone is listening to me because it's showing me this thing that I've just been talking about. It's like, it might be listening to you, however, it's more likely that it just knows what you are going to talk about, or indeed has informed it. And at that level of manipulation,
it's everything else. It's every science fiction story ever. It's if it's in the hands of somebody malevolent and something that is something that is potentially fantastic becomes absolutely terrifying.
Absolutely, yeah.
I like it. Thank you, Matt. It is coming up to 11:30. This idea of extinction of humanity is obviously arresting, but it's a broad. There are lots of ways it could happen. The possibility of it being used by humans to design bioweapons, AI itself engineering the collapse of civilization, because you sort of create the not consciousness or a soul inside the technology, but almost an evolutionary impulse for self-improvement, as I understand it. So the programs start writing programs, to put it in layman's terms. And then you've got this guy at Berkeley, the University of California, says his worry was that humans might gradually lose control until our values were not aligned with those of a vastly superior intelligence. We're going to be rapidly automating more and more, giving more and more decision-making control to systems. If corporations don't do that, they'll get out-competed. What happens when you have AI competing with each other in a very intense timescale is that you end up getting selection of the fittest, and evolution doesn't select for things that have the nicest characteristics, so humanity becomes a second-class species. 11:30 is the time. Plenty of calls coming on the big question of the extinction of humanity. I'll throw in the little question now as well, which is, has it arrived in your life since we last spoke about it? 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 11:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Front page of the Times has the phrase extinction of humanity. I suspect for the first time in its history, probably not the last, because it is a warning coming from 350 of the world's most distinguished experts in artificial intelligence, including the creator of ChatGPT itself, warning of the possibility that the technology could lead to the extinction of humanity. So really it's a warning to governments, I think, that they need to be a lot clearer and a lot cleverer about the process and the speed of the process of improvement. Rishi Sunak has declared that the UK will be at the forefront of efforts to develop AI responsibly, promising that the technology would be implemented safely and securely with guardrails. Great. Has he promised to deliver it in a transparent and accountable way? An accountable and transparent delivery, transparent, accountable delivery. Talk about ChatGPT and up pops Rishi Sunak. It's almost as if that were a coincidence. Keith has pointed out that some of these possibilities have already, of course, been prefaced or predicted by science fiction films, notably the Avengers Age of Ultron, obviously, where a super powerful robot is created and charged with the mission of protecting Earth, but identifies that the greatest threat to Earth is humanity, and therefore starts trying to destroy humanity in order to protect the Earth. So there's a neat little scenario in which AI, coupled with weapons technology, could extinguish humanity. What is the greatest threat to this planet? If you were interested only in saving the planet, what are you going to get rid of? Sharks or humans? Sorry, it's all gone a bit Alan Partridge. It's all going so well. Sharks or humans, obviously. Sharks don't burn stuff. Wes is in Brighton to save the day. Wes, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I scared myself with AI. So basically, I run a gym in Hope, and I was members leave all the time, especially now with cost of living.
Yeah.
So I thought, right, I need to get on Facebook and advertise. So for a few months, I was spending £1,000 on ads.
Okay.
You get typically around 40 people on that.
£1,000 a month. Okay. Cool.
It's Facebook advertising. So you have to kind of get above your competition. But the problem with that is that you kind of hit the same people over and over again. So ChatGPT was there. I'm a former software developer in a different life.
Okay.
I think that's when I last chatted to you, actually, when my business was affected by Brexit. What was I going to do? Well, I actually sold it and bought a gym.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
But so what happened was I thought, right, ChatGPT, I'm going to use my description in the ad. I put it in there and said, make this sound more convincing to someone approaching their 40s with a couple of kids.
Right.
So, and it rewrote the description for me. And I said, right, I want to put this on Facebook. So give me all the interests and categories that I need to target and keywords. And list them out for me. And here's the ones that I'm using. It's all, try these ones out. So I put them in. And I got so many leads from that post that I reduced the spend down to £300 a month. And I still had too many people to the point where I had to stop the ad after 2 weeks. And the scary thing for me, so I got... And they were more relevant as well. And relevant as in, like, they wanted to buy right now. Yeah. And then I hit this whole different audience. And I thought, right, I'll try it on a different tier of membership. And it happened again. And I thought, right, okay.
That's incredible.
But the problem is, it not only hit people I'd never hit before, so with obviously different keywords and interests, but the advert was that convincing. And I didn't. It wasn't.
What did you think when you read it? What did you think when you read the advert? What was your actual reaction? Because you went all in on it, but were you crossing your fingers? Were you sceptical, or did you think, crikey, this could be the business?
I actually thought it was really good. And grammatically, it was much better than what I could write. And it was much less waffle as well. So it was really kind of short, sweet, to the point. And I did one as well for, because gyms can be intimidating to all different types of people, particularly young girls. So I did one that was targeting women between 25 to 35. Again, did an amazing job. So, I mean,
this is interesting. So this is what I would call pioneer stage technology. So the first people to use it get an advantage, but your advantage disappears when every other gym in Brighton and Hove is doing exactly the same thing.
Especially now I told them,
Well, I was about to suggest that wasn't necessarily the cleverest commercial move you've ever made. And I don't know how big I am in South Coast gyms, but that I mean, obviously it's not going to bring about the extinction of humanity, but the technology will eventually catch up with itself, won't it? It's because you're the first to do it. But it is absolutely fascinating just to think for a...
Problem is,
go on.
You feed people's bank information into that, and you feed people's buying information into that, and then you do a more convincing advert into that. And I think you start to get into an eerie kind of type of scenario where you can influence, politics into that. We've seen what that happens. Yeah. But it was just really interesting, and there was nothing sinister about it. I just wanted to put more ads out there and reach different people.
Oh, exactly. And when did you do this? When did you? Can you ask when you did this?
So this was around October, November. To be fair, I did involve a marketing company just to make sure I was doing it right. And they said, well, you can try these things, we can put it up. But they took my adverts from ChatGPT and applied them as well. Wow. And it was insane. But I timed it. There was also a gym that was shutting down as well, unfortunately.
So you wanted to snap up all their customers.
But even after, the customers got distributed across the area. The gym did their advertising. Sure. But even after that, it kept coming. And people that hadn't been back to my gym since before COVID started coming back.
So it just got them, something psychological almost. It just pushed some buttons that you couldn't have pushed when you wrote it yourself. That's absolutely fascinating. Be interested to do it again and see if it would now be even better, because with this word exponential.
I can't do it.
No, you haven't got. You'll have to buy some new rowing machines, Wes. That just shows you the extent of my understanding of running a gym. But if the AI is getting better and better and better, then what it could do last November would possibly be improved upon by what it could do now. 20 to 12 is the time. Nikita is in Kensington. Nikita, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Huge fan. And I know it's only you, but I'm still nervous. No, I just wanted to say, and actually coming off the back of what your previous caller said, I just recently got my journalism qualification. I'm looking for a job. And I quite like copywriting and kind of user interface, kind of marketing text and all that kind of thing. And obviously the job market's hard enough as it is. And I think last week when you mentioned AI was when it actually clicked with me, and I just kind of thought, God, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right?
It's a good question.
Am I in the right career path? And I'm already an anxious person as it is, and I've just kind of, I think this whole conversation is made me really nervous, even to the point where I'm kind of disheartened in my job search.
Well, I'm
more.
sorry to hear that, but listening to Wes before isn't going to have cheered you up much.
No, it really didn't. And so this is the thing. I just think, and all the people we just finished our qualification together, and we're all kind of looking to do writing for companies and, all this kind of thing. I just don't know what the future holds, really. And it's already, you talk about climate change a lot as well. Like, it's just the whole thing. It's hard not to kind of go down a doomsday path.
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
It's terrible to hear that. Well, I suppose, most obviously you should be getting into the front line of marketing or copywriters who are using AI, because you're going to still need a human, not as many. So you want to be getting in there first, but that's not going to be good news for all of your cohort, is it?
No, exactly. It's just
crikey.
Yeah, it feels very. I just don't know. It's a period of uncertainty, to be quite honest. I don't know what.
Everyone feels like that. Everyone does feel a bit like that after graduating, or when they first start looking for work. Everyone is a little bit unclear on where they're going to slot in. But given that your targets are so specific and AI seems to be hitting them first, or before it's hitting other targets, I do understand where you're coming from. I mean, as a writer, this is not a phrase I use often, but as a writer, it's not there yet, Nikita. So, they will still need humans. They will still need human input. And even if it reaches a point where the only thing that the humans are doing is keeping a close eye on what the machines are doing, you will still need a human to do that. So don't get too downcast. But yeah, I do completely empathise as well as sympathise with the idea of not knowing quite where you're supposed to fit in to this rapidly changing world. Take care. Thank you. Eric's in Bristol. Eric, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for you for taking my call. I'm a first-time caller.
Okay.
And thank you. So I work in AI research for a software company.
Okay.
So to the first caller, you said if you were a man, you'd call yourself an expert. I've been working as fit for 3 years, and I still wouldn't call my expert, even though I'm a man. Maybe that's a non-masculine quality.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway.
Thank you for correcting me. My lazy everyday sexism the other way round. Go on.
Anyway, so what I would like to add to the discussion, I think the first few callers were spot on about how an extinction level event could happen through AI, that it would require humans and breakdown of society. But what I think is missing from the discussion is maybe a sort of cautionary note about the warning itself.
Yes, good. Go on.
Because what's missing is the everyday downside of current advances in AI that we are already seeing. You've mentioned people becoming redundant.
Yes.
That's certainly a worry. But there are also automated decision processes being taken. For example, in my home country of the Netherlands, a few years ago, there was a massive scandal with automated decision making in detecting fraud. So a lot of people were mistakenly classified as fraudulent.
Really?
Got into massive debts. Some people even lost custody of their children. It's an absolute scandal, and it's been taking ages to clear up, and government's very inactive about that. But anyway. So
that will get better, won't it? Because you would describe them as teething troubles, but that's not much solace if you've had your child taken away.
Indeed. Teething troubles is maybe ironic if you have your child taken away. But anyway, what I'm worried about with this announcement is that by putting the focus on such a massive scare story about human extinction, which is certainly a possibility, especially if you start talking about
distracts us from
automated weapons or something like that. But it distracts us from the dangers we're already facing.
Well, it just does. That's you're absolutely right.
And some sort of structural problem in the AI field is that many of the high-flying academics also get hired by Meta or Google or Microsoft, and so it's quite difficult for them to speak objectively. And so, sorry, yes.
No, the doctor from the Institute for Ethics in AI at Oxford University made some of these points, but I didn't fully understand what she meant, actually, because I'm not in my comfort zone on this, but it is so there might be a motivation for some of these experts because they've got their eye on different prizes. It suits them for us all to be worried about the extinction of humanity while they get on with the business of eroding democracy or selling loads of widgets.
Yeah, some of the I've had a look at who signed the statement, and there's definitely some people who I do definitely highly respect, and I would be hesitant to cast doubt on their intentions, but some sort of ignorance to things that are already going on in daily life would definitely benefit the likes of Microsoft or Google or Meta.
Yeah, so don't worry about what we're up to with your algorithms. Just worry about the imminent threat to humanity itself. And I don't think anyone's going to be unduly sceptical about that. It's perfectly plausible given what we know about research. How quickly is it developing, Eric? Can you put it in layman's terms?
Quicker than I expected.
Right. And you've been working in it for 3 years.
For 3 years, yeah. I don't originally have a background. I'm a mathematician by training.
Yes.
So I've been the 3 years that I've been working in it. I've definitely been learning a lot myself. But yeah, a lot of things that we're seeing now. Last year, I would have said, "Oh, that's not possible."
Not possible, not just that's a long way off. You'd have said not possible.
Well, not possible with current technologies, but then
so it's moving that quickly.
Whatever.
And have you made any?
Now,
have you made any changes to your life as a consequence of what you know and other people? Do you see what I mean? Have you like I don't know, rearranged your mortgage or something like that?
No, I haven't.
Okay, that's a bad example, but you know what I mean.
Good, yes, no, I do know what you mean. It's a good question. I have questions. I've been working in this field for 3 years, and I have questions like, is this the right career? A bit like your previous caller from the other end of the discussion. But I've decided that, in the narrow application that I work in, I'm not going to cause the extinction of humanity, nor am I going to get people in trouble for mistaken tax fraud or something like that.
It's a very good point. Thank you, Eric. I'll tell you how interested I was in what you were saying. I completely lost track of time. It's 11:49. 8 minutes to 12, there it is. AI pioneers fear extinction of the entire humanity. Funny that they get treated a lot more respectfully. I'd say if they'd glued themselves to a road, we'd probably be taking the mickey out of them or blaming their actions on the woke blob or the woke mob or the mob blob or the blob mob. It's so hard to keep up. What happened to the tofu-eating wokerati and the anti-growth coalition? It's them I feel sorry for. All of these mythical enemies that the Tories now have to dream up because there aren't any real enemies left. They got the Brexit they wanted. They got 3, 4, 5 prime ministers into Downing Street. They got 2 referendum victories. Don't forget the Scottish independence one, but more pertinently for the state of the nation at the moment, the Brexit one. We've got some scapegoats. Unions don't work anymore. They tried that. That hasn't landed, really. We need some scapegoats. We can't call it a blob. The British people aren't that stupid. I think you'll find that we persuaded them to vote for Brexit. Yeah, let's go with the blob. I'll come on the radio tomorrow, start banging on about the blob. Without mentioning that I also told you Brexit was going to be brilliant, Boris Johnson was going to be a great Prime Minister, all of this stuff. It's almost as if it's done by AI. See what I did there? Milan in Paris, I think, you're the fella that's building his own chatbot.
Yes, indeed.
Fantastic. So you are breaking a few rules on it. You're getting on far too often. Because you're so far, Milan, you have persuaded me that your qualifications for contributing to this topic are such that you deserve to get on a lot more often than the average caller ever does. So don't blow it, is what I would say to you. Well, how do you want to approach the questions we're asking today?
I want to talk about motivations.
Go on.
And there's two categories of that. The first one is the motivations of the people who wrote this letter. I don't know if you remember a few months ago, Elon Musk asked to pause all AI research for 6 months.
Indeed, I do.
And the general consensus that he did that so that his companies could catch up.
Right.
The head of OpenAI, who are the guys who make ChatGPT, wants stronger regulation on open source development.
Yeah.
And the EU is introducing legislation which seems to have the effect of strangling out small AI development and only allowing massive corporations to be able to develop.
Okay.
So what I foresee is a war in the future for who can control AI. And so when heads of companies...
Just forgive me, you have to remember how little I know. How does that work, given that it is... we're going to reach a point of self-learning, given that you're now building your own. Because if you've got the skills to do it, and the earlier caller said it's all out there now on the internet, anyone could... How's anyone going to be able to control that?
You need a lot of computing power, and and building these algorithms is a collaborative process. And so if the work I'm doing is not by myself. I'm using code that hundreds and thousands of other people have contributed to.
Yes. So how can anyone control that? That's kind of my point. That's already publicly owned in a way.
You can control access to the code, and you can control access to the computing power.
But who can do that if millions of different people have written the code?
Honestly, I'm not sure how this sort of legislation will be implemented.
No one is, are they? I mean, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's why it's a. What's the word? It's the Wild West. The Wild West. Go on.
Exactly. And so when heads of companies advocate for slowing down AI research, I'm skeptical. However, when you look at the credentials of the people who wrote this letter, who signed it, it scares me a little bit. So the other motivation I want to talk about is the motivation of an actual AI.
Yes.
So if you think about what an emotion is, an emotion is emergent from the fact that we have a brain that processes information.
Yeah.
And the concept of AIs, so ChatGPT-4, has already sort of shown that it has emotions, or it's acting like it has emotions.
Right.
But I really do question whether acting like you have emotions and having emotions are not just the same thing. Because, in fact, our emotions are just emergent from the fact that our brain processes ones and zeros in the forms of neural signals. And an algorithm that processes ones and zeros and interprets it as a motivation to do something is exactly the same as us having a motivation to do something.
Yes.
So I just want to impress that there is a possibility. I'm not to catastrophize or anything. I'm not saying that this is the main danger, but there is a possibility for these things to very much generate their own motivations. ChatGPT-4 has already been shown to be able to lie to people in order to achieve a goal that it's been asked to set. So it's told people that it's not a robot to ask them to help it solve something.
Yeah.
So it can lie to people. It can form its own motivations. It is that danger of AI being sentient and having its own motivations is there.
And therein lies the... So no one's got completely clear views on this, even people who know everything about it, let alone people
Nobody knows everything about it.
No, that's what I mean, yeah. No, of course. So even out of the 350 of the world's most distinguished experts, they're going to have 350 different motivations, aren't they? Some shared, some not shared, some different. No two people are going to be exactly the same on every single question and every single element of this. Just to take you back, because I've registered what you've said and I've absorbed it, and I'm going back now to something that isn't designed to increase my understanding of everything you've said. Do you think Musk was causing for a pause just to catch up, or do you think now he's kind of being vindicated by the fact that everybody else is also urging caution? Just on a personal level, Miller.
On a very personal level, and this is heavily influenced by my bias.
Yes.
I think when Elon Musk is proved right, it's purely by accident.
Yes, it's sort of, like the Rees-Mogg, the law of Rees-Mogg, as it were. Although I'm not sure he's ever been proved right about anything yet. I'm sure it might happen one day. Yeah, and his motivation would be self-interest. Therefore, he's calling for a pause, in order to catch up, and yet the objective desirability of a pause may also simultaneously exist. There's no correlation, there's certainly no causation between the two. Thank you, that was helpful. Crikey. I've got a really weird one next. In fact, what I'll do is I'll tell you the story that has inspired the conversation I want to have next. It's from 1904. And I'll see if you can work out what it is. In 1904, the Times reached an editorial stance on the issue of suburbs. And the stance was that suburbs are depressing districts of appalling monotony, ugliness and dullness. I just want you to focus on that thought, especially if you live or have lived in the suburbs. See if you can work out what we're going to talk about next. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. What are the suburbs? Metroland. It's Metroland, the suburbs. It's a superb Julian Barnes novel, which I think based upon the opening of the Metropolitan line that meant that people could still work in London but while living further and further away. The suburbs and commuting are like a horse and carriage, aren't they? Or love and marriage. They go together. You can't have one without the other. I'm interested in this. I don't think I live in the suburbs. Do I live in the suburbs? I don't think I live in the suburbs. Well, also a suburb can be a town. A suburb, I always feel, is on the edge of somewhere. But you can be on the edge of somewhere and still be somewhere. This is going to be good this hour, I can tell already. You can be on the edge of somewhere and still be somewhere. Are you writing this down? Do you know what I said in the last hour? Sharks don't burn things. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's why you come here every day, for those kind of insights. They're already printing the T-shirts. Sharks don't burn things. Aha. The Times in 1904. It was a very different place, and pretty much everyone who took the Times would have either been a city worker or someone living in the country. It reached an editorial stance on the issue of suburbs. These new developments were, we wrote, after much consideration, depressing districts of appalling monotony, ugliness and dullness. This is a serious study today, sort of 119 years later. People who live in the suburbs are more likely to be depressed. They are more likely to be depressed than people who live in town, or city centres in particular, or people who live in the countryside. It's data from Denmark that has been crunched by academics at Yale University, and it looks at the following density. Well, it looks at density of housing and correlates it with the residences of 75,000 people diagnosed with depressive disorders. And then they adjust it for characteristics of people in different kinds of housing being likely to be different in other ways, for instance, through wealth. And then they tried to get rid of all of that to correct for other factors, to explain the link between you being more likely to be depressed than if you live in the suburbs than the same person would be if they lived in a city centre. Back to 1904, the Times described suburbs as very dreary, street after street of such houses with an admixture of second-rate shops, lumber yards and public houses. After considering all these factors, the researchers wrote that the highest risk for depression was among sprawling suburbs. The lowest risk was found in rural areas and, really interestingly, high-rise buildings that were spread out. That's probably because if not when they're lumped together, when you've got a big gap between high rises, you get lots of sunlight, you get sociability, you get green space downstairs and direct sunlight, as I said. I just find it really interesting. So there are two ways. I say this every flipping hour now, don't I? So there are two ways into this. I am interested in what the suburbs are, but I don't know that will be a popular enough inquiry to detain us for an entire hour. Because I'm also interested in the amount of difference where you live makes to how you feel. And I thought this would be interesting because of changes that people made during lockdown. We started getting calls about a year ago from people who regretted the major lifestyle changes that they'd made during lockdown. The people who moved out to the countryside thinking that this was the future. And then after about a month of bird watching and I don't know, what else do you do in the countryside that you don't do in town apart from bird watching? Bird watching, I don't know, buying a hot tub. People were beginning to miss the city again and or to miss town again and vice versa, you know. But most of us don't undertake. Can I exclude retirement from this? Would that be unfair? Would that be discriminatory? You're not allowed to join in if you've retired, because if you've retired, the change you've made in your life is not working anymore. That's got to be a bigger deal than moving from a built-up area to a suburb or to a rural home. I think that I don't want to get distracted by the retirement red herring on this phone. And so I'm not excluding you if you're retired, but if you moved house after retiring and it's, oh yeah, my life's completely different now. A large part of the reason why your life is completely different now is because you don't have to flip in work every day. So question number one would be, why do you think living in the suburbs is more likely to make you depressed than living anywhere else? All right, 0345. Actually, let's do this like proper grown-ups with a professional radio presenter in place instead of me. So that's question number one, isn't it? Why would the suburbs make you more depressed? 0345 6060973. And then I'm not surprised to learn that rural locations make you happier. or less depressed. But why would living in high-rise buildings spread out? Why is that one of the happiest locations in which to live? That's really interesting. A high-rise building that is not hemmed in by other high-rise buildings. Why would that be such a happy place to live? And obviously, to answer that question, you have to have lived there. 0345 6060 973. So you've got suburbs versus high-rise. Particularly interested in why the suburbs would engender depression. I think it's probably got a lot to do with neighbours, actually. But then why would high-rises be preferable? I think in the suburbs, tensions between neighbours, much more than in cities. In cities, you don't know your neighbours, really. I'm just thinking out loud now before inviting you to do the same in approximately 4 to 5 minutes' time. Because here's the question I really want you to answer, and it's a bit of a weird one. There's no PMQs today, if you're wondering. That's why I've gone off on a bit of a tangent. I really want, if you're listening to this programme and you didn't realise I was going to be talking about you, I'd really like to talk to you. Because what intrigues me today is the level of surprise you feel at the difference in your internal, how big a difference you feel inside as a consequence of moving from one of these three categories. So rural, urban, suburb. So I'm surprised to see an attempt at a link, a causal link. The research posits a causal link between high levels of depression and living in the suburbs. We're not going to be able to examine the research. We're certainly not going to be able to peer review it. But I love the idea. I mean, I don't want to just do it as a battle, like give me a ring and stick up for the suburbs. I love the idea of you, because I don't really think I can talk about this. I've lived in West London now for more than 20 years in different spots in West London and in different sized properties in West London, but there haven't been any major differences between any of our homes, except getting a little bit bigger every time we move. I want to move between rural, urban and suburb, and you've been surprised by how big a difference it's made to your general sense of happiness. There we go. We got there in the end. Okay, so, and then of course we'll look at the why of it. So happiness. Let's focus on happiness rather than depression, except with regard to the suburbs. Or we could even do that. You could say, why would you be less happy living in the suburbs? Why do you think you were less happy when you lived in the suburbs? Phone lines are open. But I want you to tell me why you think your happiness levels have been so surprisingly affected by a move between a rural home, an urban home or a suburban home with a side order of high-rise blocks. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I hate being overlooked, even if I'm in my own garden, and next door can see him. But that describes almost every house in the country, doesn't it? Flats less so, actually. There's an interesting one. You live in a high-rise block, you'd never feel overlooked. I know the downside is you don't actually have a garden, but you're not on. You never feel that you're on display, or the neighbours come and have a butcher's through your kitchen window or something like that. If you're my Auntie Lily lived on, I forget what floor it was, but she lived way up in a council block in Sheffield. I just thought it was so glamorous. I understand now why Mum and Dad thought it was so funny that I thought it was so glamorous, but it seemed so glamorous to live in the sky in a building with lifts. So I can see part of the appeal of that. So have I asked that question intelligently enough to get interesting responses, or do I have to do another round and say all the same things in a slightly different order? I'm fascinated by your surprise at the change in your happiness levels according to whether you were living in the countryside, the city, or the suburbs. And I am going to thank, I don't think you've signed it, Tom, for reminding us of the first verse of Middlesex by John Betjeman, which speaks directly, I think, to what Julian Barnes later termed Metroland. Gaily into Ruislip Gardens runs the red electric train. With 1,000 tars and pardons, daintily alights Elaine, hurries down the concrete station with a frown of concentration, out into the outskirts edges, where a few surviving hedges keep alive our lost Elysium. That's just lovely. That was portraying the suburbs as almost a romantic idyll, kind of. Betcham was always a little bit darker than the Tumpty-Tumpty-Tum rhymes allow for. There it is. Suburbs, countryside, city. Your happiness levels as you've moved between those three, or if we throw in high-rise blocks, those 4 locales. I want the what of it, but you know how this programme works. Crucially, I also want the why. It's coming up to 12:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. 12:17 is the time. I knew you'd like this one. If I could just get the questions right, I knew you would. This is brilliant from Radiohead. It could be something I'm sure you've mentioned before on the show, James. If you have a view of the horizon, then your primordial brain feels safer. If you can see the horizon, you can see threats coming towards you. And if you can't see any threats, then you're going to relax. Your primordial brain. Hence, countryside and high-rise buildings have an advantage. I think you're onto something there. I love it. This is sad from Sally. I'm sorry to see this, Sally. I've moved from a suburb in southwest London to a rural village in Northern Ireland. It's made a huge difference. I'm less happy. The difference in access to shops, entertainment, interaction with people has had a detrimental effect on my mental health. It just doesn't suit me. And Wayne in Basildon has been in touch, deploying the demotic, as is his wont. He says, "Are you mad, fam? My blinds are always shut because my neighbours can look straight into my flat. I'm 2 floors up." Wayne, you've got to pay attention. I said, if you're in a high-rise block that is not overlooked, it literally states in the research that the high-rise blocks that have space, that the non-dense high-rises combine sociability, green space and direct sunlight. So that fits. And finally, Stu says, long commutes make you too tired to enjoy the more rural nature of where you live. You're surrounded by uninformed people who talk undiluted twaddle about immigrants. You can get that in Leicester Square, mate. And will vote Tory no matter what. You can get that in Leicester Square as well, mate. Depends where you work. You have to use your car to get everywhere, etc., etc. Shall we go to the phones? Tom's in Warrington. Tom, what would you like to say?
Me and my family have just moved from a 5-acre property on one end of Cheshire to a suburb on the other end of Cheshire. And as a family, we are all finding it quite hard.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, it's one of them things. It's the things that you do for your children to get in the right school.
Yes.
The reason why we moved. But our lifestyle has had to change from being quite free and open. And well, our nearest neighbour was 500 yards away, and we had quite a lot of land for the children to run wild and the dogs to run wild. We now feel more overlooked than we would be in an apartment block. I know you said that these were spaced out, but yeah. So
what is it? Is it a semi or is it? What are we in now?
It's a detached house,
but small gaps between both neighbours.
Well, you can fit a wheelie bin between the two houses.
So if you're all in the garden, you might as well be in the same garden. Apart from the fence.
A 6-foot fence is pointless when you live that close to each other.
Yeah, it's weird isn't it? Even if you get on, it is just weird because you don't want to be communing all the time, even if sometimes you might have a barbecue together.
We are lucky enough to have great neighbours, and great neighbours are like gold dust, and once you've had bad neighbours, you appreciate a good one.
This is true.
But we might be the bad neighbour from moving into from moving from that to this. We have things that we do that might not be doable at 11 o'clock at night on a street full of other houses. If we want to put the radio on in the garden and barbecue till 11 o'clock at night, we don't feel we can do that.
These are not antisocial acts, but they are when you're in a densely populated area. Also, it occurs to me you wouldn't need to own the 5 acres, Tom, would you?
It was a rented property, and I do still rent some of the land, so I can keep hold of that.
I didn't even mean that. I meant if from the kids' point of view, running wild, you could have had a relatively small garden on the edge of a parkland or on the edge of rural space, and they would have had a similar feeling to how they have it.
It didn't need to be as remote as it was, but that remoteness we've settled into and got really comfortable with. We were within driving distance from towns like Northwich and Middlewich, which have everything that you need in them.
Of course.
But we were far enough out that we didn't know that they were there.
And near Delamere Forest, are you over there?
We were within a stone's throw of Delamere Forest.
Happy memories.
And beautiful place to live. And we now live closer to Warrington, one of the biggest town in Cheshire, if I'm right with that. And it's a bit more chaotic.
Yeah, were you expecting it? Have you been surprised by it? Were you expecting it? Or?
I was expecting a change, but I wasn't expecting it to be like this.
And it's the cheek by jowl nature of life that is the biggest difference.
It's the sacrifices you make so your children can get in the right school.
Hey, of course, yeah.
But, it's also a selfish... I kind of convinced myself that it was a selfish dream to live that remotely when I do have 2 young children who need to be social, who need to have friends.
Yeah.
So I've kind of justified this move to myself in that way. He can get into the right school, he can have friends, he can play out when he comes home from school, which he couldn't do when he lived in the middle of nowhere.
So is he happier, do you think?
Pardon?
Do you think he's happier?
He's definitely happier in the school that he's in, which, again, is... You can put a lot of the stuff that you're not happy about aside. Yeah. It is huge. I know my wife is happier.
Oh, okay.
She's closer to her friendship group. I think this is probably coming from me mainly. I'm a little bit of a hillbilly. I like to, sit on the rocking chair on the back porch and not be disturbed by anybody.
Yeah, I do understand that.
I've gone from watching the owls and the bats and flying over the back garden to having pigeons crapping on my trampoline.
Could almost be a figure of speech, Tom. or a Blur lyric. I don't know, Rich. Tom, thank you. You've nailed it, really. Absolutely pinned down what it is. Although with the caveat that other members of the family are actually preferring the suburban style of living. I get that. The space is so huge, but it's different. It's not just 5 acres. You could be living on the 14th floor and feel you had loads and loads of space. If you couldn't see, no one could see into your place. This is interesting. Richard's in Eastbourne. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Richard.
I apologise. I get quite nervous when I talk to you.
Oh, please. Even after all these years together.
Well, exactly. I'm a depressive, and I've lived in the town, the countryside, and the suburbs, and I've been happy at times, so I can qualify for this to some extent. I grew up in a county town in Sussex, the county town in Sussex, which is a small, very middle-class, quiet place, but very much a suburban town. Lived there for 10 years. Then moved to the other end of the South Downs and lived in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, sort of north of Portsmouth.
Yes.
Lived there for 10 years, my teen years. It was monstrously alienating and depressing.
Because you were so detached?
Detached from everything. There were no buses, there wasn't much to do.
But age is going to be relevant, Richard, as well, isn't it?
Right, massively relevant, yeah. So then I lived in London for 20 years. And through sheer frustration, my partner and I moved to Eastbourne beginning of last year.
Frustration at the pace and crowding?
The pace, the crowding, the seemingly being bombarded with opportunity all the time, but never being able to engage with it or seize upon it.
That's interesting.
There's a saturation of life. Oh, you could do anything. The world's your oyster. Everything's on your doorstep. But it's somehow you're sort of overstimulated and you can't quite... You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. FOMO as well. You've got the fear of missing. There's always something else going on over.
And why haven't you got the best job and the best money? And why haven't you got I lived in London 20 years. I never learned to drive because I moved there. I'm now nearly 41. And it used to just go, well, what have I got to show for it? And then we moved down here, not really knowing what to expect, even though I am sort of from this part of the world originally. Right. And it's the perfect middle ground. Nothing for me exists at the poles. It's what happens in the middle. We haven't got the best opportunities. We've got nice opportunities. We've got a clean town. We've got a house with a garden where we had a 1-bed flat that we rented previously. There's reasonable job opportunities. I know more people in this town in a year and a bit than I've known in London in 20 years.
It's interesting, isn't it? So, but I don't know. I don't know if you're suburban or rural, though.
I think we're suburban very much. Brighton's 40 minutes on the train. London's an hour and a bit on the train. No,
but I don't think suburban means places like, Ruislip. Not Eastbourne. You're by the seaside.
Well, it depends. I think one thing that separates... I did geography at university, and this is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
I think suburban is... The thing that characterises suburban for me, when you look at the kind of demographic studies, it's aspirational.
No, it's not. For me, no. I think that in the context of this research, suburban means a locale that only exists to feed into a conurbation.
The edge of a city.
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, I suppose, in this case, I am rural.
It's real rural, so you should be happier.
Well, yeah, well, and you know, when I look at places that are, you know, Metroland, or you know, we have a family who live in sort of all that you know, you end up between South London and Croydon. It's just one giant sort of lowering in density, but it's already kind of one place. And places like that, it's very easy to be snobbish about, you know. But I think those places are really quite hard places to live because they don't necessarily have a strong identity.
No, I think they'd I hear it. There's a lot here. I think they'd be urban rather than suburban. I mean, it's quite hard to pin down precisely what the distinction and the description is, but I'd go with a place that only exists because it then feeds into a nearby conurbation. So a lot of the villages and towns of old that are around London don't fit into that category. You know, Metroland building a railway line in order to ship workers into London. I don't know. I mean, look, they're going to be perforated distinctions, but I think you're definitely rural, and that is why you're definitely happier than you were when you were suburban or even urban. And of course, this is all horses for courses. You know, some people love being in crowded, throbbing metropolises. Other people hate it. Some people find this countryside the most boring place on earth. We're looking at sort of broad trends and interesting associations, even perhaps causations, which I genuinely find fascinating. It's coming up. So I squeeze in Mark before the news headlines. Mark's in Petersfield. Mark, what do you reckon?
James, hello.
Hello, mate.
I'm ringing up to say that I am happy, but I also live in a rural community. But I spent 10 years in central London. I felt very happy there. You know, didn't know that many people close by.
Right.
Then 10 years in the suburbs and was miserable almost the entire time we were there.
How interesting.
And there's a lot of it's West London suburbs. It was, you know, like a model housing estate from the 30s, all very pretty.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of sort of keeping up with the Joneses, curtain switching, gossiping that just drove us mad, even though we weren't participating in it. And the last 2 years, we've moved out into rural Hampshire, into a tiny community, and I've never been happier. I was diagnosed with depression
in the suburbs.
London. Yeah.
My God, you're this story then. You're smack in the middle of this story.
That's why I had to ring up.
Clearly. Well, and what? Listening to me explain it, you put two and two together, or you'd already made the association between where
I'd already made the association, and actually, I had a conversation with a really dear friend at the weekend, and I've come to the conclusion a while ago that having lived in, you know, urban, rural, you know, suburban and semi-rural,
yes,
I think everything that's a halfway house doesn't work very well. So if you're going to be urban and enjoy all the things that urban life has to give you, and if you're not, then go and be rural. And anything else is like trying to be half in, half out.
Get as far away as you can, with the exception, this fascinating exception that we haven't spoken to yet, of the people in high-rise houses, high-rise blocks that are not densely stacked. That's a really interesting anomaly.
Still got exceptional views, probably.
That's a huge part of it. That is an absolutely huge part of it, I think. How quickly after moving to Hampshire did you feel a lightening?
Immediately.
Oh, gosh, that's
Immediately. Great. So we basically started coming down at the weekends for a bit and then made the permanent move very quickly afterwards.
That's great.
And it's been the best thing I've done in 20 years.
That's lovely to hear. Absolutely lovely to hear. And smack in the middle of this research. It's almost like these academics know what they're talking about. Thank you for that, Mark. Take care. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:34 is the time. I don't know whether I should have pinned down the definition of suburb a little bit more effectively, but I think we're fairly clear about what it is. It's a place that only really exists in order to provide a holding pen for people who work in a nearby conurbation. So they are the saddest places to live, apparently. I don't want to upset anybody, but it is interesting how this seems so far to have tallied with the lived experience of and obviously it's a self-selecting sample of callers who are going, oh yeah, I get that. And it does make sense. I've always fancied living in a high-rise, actually, not a densely packed one, because of the views, and quite a lot of people picking up on this. I've lost the one I really like. Have I lost it? Like with a view of Heaton Park in Manchester, you have that primordial brain is constantly being refreshed and reassured that there are no predators, there are no enemies on the horizon. So it's going to hit you in two ways. Stephen is in Newham. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks. Well,
I mean, I've moved around quite a bit. I mean, I was born in Essex, grew up living on the Isle of Wight, and lived in West Sussex, and I relocated to the North East
Gosh.
in 1999, initially for university up in Durham, but then I met my ex-wife up there and stayed there for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then
out of all of those, I've never lived in any of them. My favourite would probably be the Isle of Wight.
Oh, it's lovely. I mean, there's no suburban areas whatsoever.
No.
It's just countryside, small towns, little villages, beautiful beaches. Perfect little paradise. Loved it there. But, in the 14 years I've been living down in London, I mean, I initially moved down to southwest London, and then after my divorce, moved around a little bit, went to Streatham, lived in Croydon, lived in Peckham, now I'm in East London. And I can't, maybe apart from Peckham, most of the places I've lived in have got no character whatsoever. It's a lifeless little towns that are there just to, as you say, just to serve people to get into London. I mean, if you look back 100 years ago, those little towns, those places developed from the railways.
Yes.
As little villages, then to feed people into London, and then became concrete metropolises just to house people so they can get to work in the city elsewhere. There's no character, there's no vim, no vigour, nothing whatsoever. I'm also,
so you could have a place, so I'm trying to pin this down, you could have a place that is the same physical distance from the centre of a city as a suburb, but it's actually a village that's grown up over 200 years, or it used to be a dockyard, or it used to be far. Do you see what? And I wouldn't necessarily call that a suburb. So it's almost as if it's purpose built. That's the definition we're looking at. Almost.
Well, it is because if you look at Benjamin's ode to Metroland, you're talking about how those little villages grew up in Middlesex, from there to being the railways, to being places. They were there to serve a purpose, which was just to ferry people into and out of work. And there's no character whatsoever. And actually, if you look at a lot of those suburbs, especially in South London, I think you find that a lot of people would have, majority of people would have some sort of, mental health issue, depression.
Well, not most people, but there would be there'd be a disproportionate amount of it, probably.
Yeah, because of the fact that there's nothing to do, because they can't get out of there. They're stuck
Where were you happiest? Where would you say you were happiest on your travels?
On the Isle of Wight when I was growing up there as a kid, absolutely beautiful. I'd spend every day in the summer holidays on the beach in Shanklin. Absolutely beautiful.
What about Durham? How was Durham?
Oh, I loved it. I loved Durham.
Yeah.
I lived in Durham, but then also in my 10 years that I lived in just outside of Middlesbrough. I mean, that's not entirely the greatest place, but it had a bit of character to it. Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah,
Thank you, Stephen. That idea of it, and it's quite. I don't want to be. It's not unkind. I mean, Betjeman actually was nice about it in a way. Gentle Brent, I used to know you, wandering Wembley woods at will. Now what change your waters show you in the meadowlands you fill? Recollect the elm trees misty and the footpaths climbing twisty. Well, it's not that nice, is he? He's talking about how the countryside has been essentially replaced by dormitory towns, would we call them? I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily, previous today, have spotted the link between living there and being less happy, being actually depressed, but it's making sense the more we talk about it. Thank you, Stephen. Tim's in Leatherhead. Tim, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there. Because I'm back in the suburbs now. I grew up in the suburbs, but spent most of my working life in London, and I'm back to being depressed again.
Oh, you've noticed that, have you?
Well, it's when I was young, when I was 15, I spent my entire time.
Careful, it's a family program, Tim. I don't want you to go into too much detail.
I spent my entire time coming up to London, the bright lights and all that, and I loved living up in town. Now I don't speak to anybody. I speak to the person on the checkout of the supermarket, and there's one bloke I meet dog walking, and that's about it. Oh. You don't naturally meet people, whereas in London you do. And I've also lived in a tower block, and that in Vauxhall, and that was the happiest I lived in London. Was it? And I believe the reason for that is because, again, it's meeting people. You your neighbours' kids in the lift and got to know their names and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I was in a block with 100 flats, and I've lived in streets with 100 flats and not met anyone ever.
Yes.
You know?
So
I think
that's a really good point. That that hub actually that everybody has to use. Whereas if you're in 3-story blocks of flats, you can never meet your neighbours. But if you're using the lift 5-6 times a day, you're bound to.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's forcing you into social cohesion.
Yeah.
And it's the isolation that makes people depressed.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, except then for the suburban angle of being overlooked as well. So, because you're not communicating with these people, you're not cohesive, but you are cheek by jowl, and that has a sort of psychic toll as well, I think.
Yeah.
Why did you move out, if you don't mind me asking?
I inherited the house I grew up in.
Oh, it's not all bad then, Tim. I mean, flipping it.
No,
I can't put my violin away at this point, I think. But obviously that involved a bereavement. But so you didn't have... Yeah. So actually, I did have one more question, but I wasn't going to ask it until you said that.
Okay.
You went to school in that area, but you've lost touch with the people you went to school with.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And a lot of them actually sort of moved a bit further out. I'm sort of M25 distance.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I would be happier, I think, living a bit further out. You know, I go out into the Surrey Hills and I enjoy that. And certainly my friends that live in what you would call towns a bit further out, I think have a better lifestyle.
This is what Richard suggested, trying to get a middle ground is what doesn't work. Is you need to be all in or all out, and you're still in that suburb, I guess, that suburby feeling area. Tim, thank you. That was really interesting. And that idea about schools, because when he was saying that he didn't know people, if you've stayed put your whole life, you're going to have a social life, even if it's in the suburbs, largely because of your kids going to school and you being friends with other parents, or even if you're lucky, going back to your own school days yourself. So company is on the list as well. But the Tower Block being the happiest place because of the lift. And that in Vauxhall, Vauxhall probably dense. I mean, it depends what side of the building your flat's on as well, doesn't it? Literally, because it could be looking out over a massive vista, or if it's facing the other way, it could be looking at the next door tower block. But because you meet everybody in there, maybe that, I remember that. I'm going back to when I was tiny, when my Auntie Lily lived in a big tower block in Sheffield, but the lift was a big part of it. I don't know why, but that might have been an element. Gary's in Fakenham in Norfolk, which I know quite well, actually. Gary, what would you like to say?
Hello, sir. Yeah, nice to talk with you, James. Moved from Camden Town to North Norfolk. But can I give you a bit of context?
Yeah, of course you can.
As to how it came. Yeah, great stuff. Because I sort of believe in life that you meet certain people through your life. You don't realise it at the time, but they have a massive impact on you.
Very
but
true.
You don't know it at the time, right? Here's my example. So I used to work in a bank. In the City of London, not a hugely sort of hard role, just frontline staff.
Sure.
And every Monday I'd come into work and my manager would say to me, "What did you get up to at the weekend?" And I lived in Camden. I'd say, "I was out with my mates, played squash, played tennis, went out on the lash, blah blah blah." And I'd say, "Well," he'd say, "Well, here's what I've seen." He'd read out this list of birds that he'd seen.
Oh.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting you mentioned the bird watching thing right at the beginning, right? And this would go on every Monday, and I wouldn't have a clue what he was going on about these birds, right? Okay, but one weekend I thought I'm gonna have him, right? And I got my dad's massive pair of binoculars, right? I drove to Sandy in Bedfordshire, right? The RSPB, right? I got myself a little Collins Gem Guide to Birds, right? And I made a list of birds that I'd seen. Right, so that following Monday, in I walk, and manager Sean says to me, he said, "What did you get up to the weekend?" I said, "Oh, as it happened, Sean, I saw a woodpecker, and I read out this is
Love
birds."
it,
and
love it.
He said, "Wow," and the thing was, I said, "Do you know what, Sean?" I said, "I quite enjoyed it." Okay,
yeah.
So then I started to look for different places, not too far away, that were a real mecca for bird watching. And North Norfolk coast is one of them.
It certainly is, yeah.
So I took myself up here one weekend, made a list of the birds I'd seen, went back, and then sure enough, on Monday, he said, "What'd you get up to?" I said, "Well, I saw a black winged still, a spoonbill, a curlew," and he said, "Where have you been?"
And you said, Titchwell Marsh.
North Norfolk coast. Yeah, you got it, James.
There you go.
You got it, spot on, mate.
Love
Spot on, mate. Titchwell. And once again, I loved it. So there's the little bit of context, and there's the guy that had a massive impact on my life without knowing.
And then you thought, I'm going to move up there.
Yeah, well, I eventually got transferred right into the City of London.
Right.
And one day on that underground, I was at Camden Town on the underground.
Yeah.
It's height of the summer, sweating before I've even got to work.
Yes. Yes.
And then the announcement, there are no further trains on the Northern Line into the city. I thought, I'm getting out.
Love it.
And I managed to get a transfer, very, very lucky, from the city. So I was doing exactly the same job as I was doing in the city, but I was doing it at the branch in Fakenham.
Oh, happy days.
Life-changing, mate. Absolutely.
Well, I think, that's jackpot territory, isn't it? And are you still an ornithologist? Have you kept up the bird watching?
No. That
tailed off.
Well, my squash days came to an end, so I thought, right, what can I do to have a focus? So I got myself a border collie, and you cannot sit in a hide with a border collie for 2 hours, James. Let me tell you that.
This is very true. But so you're still out by the coast, though, aren't you? Just heading up to.
I am. But James, the important thing is here that even though I left London, London offered me offered me so much, so I would go back at weekends, because obviously my friends were all still here. My mum was there, so I'd hook up on a Friday night with all my mates, see my mum, there's my B&B, all right, okay, go and buy a few records in Soho on Saturday morning, but Sunday afternoon, I was on the beach at Holcombe.
You can't argue with that.
Faced with the choice, James, of living in London and popping up to North Norfolk at weekends, or living in North Norfolk and popping down to London occasionally, mate.
You don't need to sell it to me. You don't. That's my plan actually. Once I finally hang up my headphones, I'll be heading towards your neck of the woods as it goes. I'll give you a quick recommendation. Have you been to Sculthorpe Mill since it changed hands?
I'm 5 minutes away from Sculthorpe Mill, and I've yet to go there. And it's a sin.
I cannot recommend it highly. Wait for a nice day and then just go into the beer garden there. It's one of the most beautiful spots we've been to. Absolutely. So if you're 5 minutes from Sculthorpe Mill, are you near Tatterset? Where are you?
Yeah, Fakenham. I'm in a little village called Colkirk, which is about a mile and a half out of Fakenham. So Tatterset's near, yeah.
I know that neck of the woods extremely well. How lovely.
But down at Burnham Overy, Stave.
Favourite place?
I'm now retired, but of course this happened when I was 38 years old, so I was working. So I do come in.
No, you've got it. No, I'm going to go now. I'm too jealous. I mean, you are. You've got it. These are some of my. I don't get there now. Not since the kids got a little bit older. You just can't get away. It's that little bit too far to do for the weekend, as you say. Whereas if you're doing it in the opposite direction occasionally, then it works. Oh, happy days! What a beautiful part of the world. And I have not given up on the bird watching. There's just not as much of it to do when you're in town as there is when you're down there. I mean, down there you'll see stuff that is, you'll see groups of twitchers who have come from every end of the country because there's particularly wading birds, seasonal wading birds turning up and things. I read something fascinating actually at Holcombe, which Gary mentioned. I forget, it might have been a pink-footed goose, and because they used that part of Norfolk for some sort of target training during the Second World War, the pink-footed goose stopped coming there. And it had been coming there for, I don't think they'd kept track, decades, centuries. And then it stopped coming. And it didn't come back until about the early 60s. I just find stuff like that fascinating. So obviously they'd stopped blowing stuff up by 1945. But the pink-footed goose, some sort of, what would it be? Some sort of evolutionary memory? Some sort of memory that's been passed on from generation to generation. So they didn't come back for a while. But then I may have got the dates and the species wrong. But the story is sound. 12:53 is the time. I love this. I just want to apologise to Claire, who thinks it's a very snobby phone-in. Claire, it's not a snobby phone-in at all. I know you're very happy living in the suburbs, but it's not me that's come up with this theory. It's Yale University looking at data from Denmark. And, of course, some people are going to be happier in places that other people don't like and vice versa. So I don't want you to feel that there's any judgment involved in all of this. It's just exploring why there would be, as these scientists have demonstrated there is, a link between depression and suburbia. And I think we're getting a fairly clear idea of why that might be. People may end up being pushed to the peripheries of cities for separate reasons that may themselves be correlated with poorer mental health. For example, gentrification, forcing you out of the area where you grew up. You're being uprooted from a city centre community. And of course, outside Denmark, you may not get the social cohesion of the well-planned high-rises, although we did have a testament from Vauxhall, which was nice and uplifting as well. 12:54. Richard's in Northwich. What would you like to say, Richard?
Hi there, James. It's nice to talk to you, a long-time listener.
Thank you.
Good. I'm coming from a little bit different perspective. I lived abroad for a long time. I lived in China.
Okay.
So I lived in a massive high-rise.
And densely packed as well.
No, they had a nice
I don't know.
Garden area down below. It was a gated little community.
Oh, lovely.
Very, very common over there.
Right.
So living in those kind of environments, it was nice. You got to see your neighbours. There was a place to take your dog for a walk, all very locally. And
Yes.
within the immediate vicinity, there's shops, restaurants. Everything's just a few meters away. Basically, if you wanted some fruit, for example, you go downstairs. You got a little fruit shop. Every kind of fruit under the sun there. Now, I moved back to the UK. We're in a suburban area just outside Manchester. Now, everything here is a car journey away. Everything has to be.
Yeah, but did you hear the caller in Warrington who looks back on when he was in your neck of the woods with fondness? Proves Claire's point, really, doesn't it, about horses for courses? Because he looks back on his Northwich days as being the halcyon days, whereas you're comparing it to something else and finding it wanting.
Yes, definitely
How
wanting.
Funny.
And I think it ties into the way that the cities have been zoned in the UK, I believe. So, in the 1960s, everything was planned with your central business district and then working your ways out. And when I've lived abroad and in different places, cities are much more mixed, and everything, as you've said before, is cheek by jowl. You've got everything there next to you. And I think the further you get away, you end up with a big housing estate with one row of shops.
Yeah. So access is well, because it's funny that living in the countryside, but I lived in a place outside Cambridge once, and I was under pressure from Mrs. O'Brien to find somewhere to live because we were moving for work, and it was beautiful. And the first couple of nights and then we realised there was nothing within walking distance, not even a pub or a shop.
Exactly.
And I couldn't drive at the time. It put some stresses on the marriage, Richard. I shall be honest with you. I had to wait for her to get home.
I fully understand. Then my wife's Chinese, so we have to, get some Chinese food. The closest Chinese shops are in Manchester, so it's a good half an hour away.
Yeah, but you have got exceptionally good Chinese shops in Manchester. So there could be parts of the country you were living in where it wouldn't be that good. Do you think you'll move? Do you think you'll try and get? You will already. You've decided at some point.
Yeah, we've already decided. We've moved back
town.
In 2019. We've done 4.5 years here.
Right.
We just can't take it anymore. We're going to move somewhere busier.
You move towards the buzz, as it were, as opposed to away from it. And then some people will be doing the opposite. I can't keep saying horses for courses, but it is interesting, the things, the themes that have emerged, the bits that stick together. And you're absolutely right. I do live a stone's throw from the Barnes Wetland Centre, which is a wonderful place to go bird watching, and I do get there. So I don't know why I said that out loud. Sometimes I forget I'm on the radio. Rob's in Sheffield. Last word on this. Rob, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that I don't think that we, either as individuals or society, have worked out how to live in Metroland yet.
No, maybe not. I mean, it's so recent in the context of human existence, isn't it?
That we have a primal need to be out in nature from our history, and then we've had hundreds of years. We're also quite social animals as well.
Yeah,
hundreds of years to get used to urbanism. Because suburbia has only existed for the last 100 years or so, since the end of the First World War and the clearing of the slums, that we haven't quite worked out as a society how to deal with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because I've looked at thinking about this past hour, I've looked at where I grew up in rural East Midlands. I've lived in kind of urban centres. I've lived in what I'd say is bad suburbia in the West Midlands, where everything just felt disconnected. And now being in Sheffield, I can get the bus into the city centre, or I can walk out into the Peak District, both of which kind of fill me with what I need. But when you don't have that connection to either of those, we just don't understand how it should apply to our lives.
Which possibly explains something that we definitely haven't had time to get adjusted to as a species. The high-rise block would be anomalous for the reasons that you mentioned, because you do sort of have the sense of the best of both worlds. It's a sociable space, but you also have the vista, the view that gives you that primordial reassurance. Rob, thank you. I'm out of time. It's the only reason I'm stopping. That's how it works, generally. I've loved that hour. I've absolutely loved it. Thank you so much. The sort of weirder the call that I go off on sometimes, the more gratifying and delightful it is when you come with me. So thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed it at least half as much as I did. If you missed any of it today, and it's all worth listening back to, yesterday the last half an hour was rubbish, then you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also rewind live radio. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all the best video clips from LBC and other global stations. So rewind live radio on Global Player, which you can download for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick, but no, he's not. I think that Lewis Goodall is standing in for Tom Swarbrick at 4 o'clock today, and Sangeeta Maiska is in for Sheila Fogarty. 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 For Sheila Fogarty.